Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 521. When Azathoth first discovered the Nyarlathotep totem. The nameless one was thin and starving, unable to eat anything. The Nyarlathotep totem had hated this world since long ago. Everyone was starving and it was an unfortunate world. So he resented Azathoth. He said that even though he had enough power, he did not move and was neglecting this world. Like me, Ira, Yuan chewed on Nyarlathotep totem's words in his mouth. And at that moment, Yuan couldn't answer for himself whether he was Kim Yuan or Azathoth. Well, it was my fault from the beginning. Yuan's gaze turned to the desolate desert. This world had already perished long ago. In a world where not a single drop of water flowed, naturally, no one could survive. In such a place, Azathoth wanted other lives to live. That's how he shared his name, and this was the result. In the end, he was the one who would liquidate all of this. Still, I should be glad about this. The sight inside the tower was reflected in one of Yuan's eyes. Who is this beauty? Aphrodite, get out of there. It's Pandora, Kim Yuan's girlfriend. Kim Yuan has a girlfriend. Why are you flirting with a woman here when you're going to go back soon? Get lost. No, and do you think she's prettier than you? You just can't see it because of where we were. In front of Pandora, Sun Ogong's clone burst into laughter. Pandora, who had received help in an urgent situation, looked bewildered as if wondering what was going on. Colleagues from the future, Yuan was able to confirm their existence through Pandora's eyes. Mimir, he didn't have to think too hard to know what kind of sacrifice Mimir had made to create this moment. Still, thanks to that it's become much easier. Originally, he planned to defeat the Nyarlathotep totem here and return to the tower. He thought that if he hurried, he might be able to arrive before the fight was over, or at least not too late. However, thanks to Mimir, there was a big variable on the other side. Odin and Heracles had brought their colleagues and crossed over to this side. Odin and Heracles have brought their companions and over here. Thatrunamais not heshelbut ekernal. The various names you are obsessed with or anything more than the deceptive outward appearance. The true self is the core, not the shell. The many names you cling to are nothing more than that flimsy shell. The same words, down to the last letter. That was how similar their delusions were. I am Azathoth. The moment he heard that name. Fuu. The world surrounding the Nyarlathotep totem changed. The purple sky, the sky that had been torn apart by the battle until now. Like black ink spreading over a carefully drawn picture, the world surrounding the Nyarlathotep totem turned pitch black. And in that pitch black darkness, I am the unholy king who sits on the throne in the chaos of amorphousness and prepares for the great chaos. Yuan sat on the throne with his chin resting on his hand and looked down at the Nyarlathotep totem. There is no name greater than mine. The Nyarlathotep totem's eyes widened. To think that he would have to look up at him like this again. He could already feel his insides churning. That's unreasonable. It may seem that way. Thud. Yuan got down from the throne. Leisurely steps. The Nyarlathotep totem used its name to try to devour Yuan. But, there's nothing here. The Nyarlathotep totem's name didn't respond. No name, no anything. Thud. Yuan, who had completely gotten off the throne, looked much taller than before. He looked down at his hand just in case, and it had turned into the skinny palm of a young child. What the hell is going on? Didn't I tell you? The names you cling to are nothing more than flimsy shells. Yuan looked down at the Nyarlathotep totem. The little child, who was only about as tall as Yuan's waist, had lost even the face it had barely gained. Didn't you say that you wouldn't abandon this world like I did? And Yuan, you were wrong. He told Nyarlathotep totem the truth that he hadn't told him all this time. The world you hated so much, I was the one who made it that way, Nyarlathotep. Quote exclamation mark quote. As if shocked, the Nyarlathotep totem's thin arms shook. Azathoth. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The Nyarlathotep totem's anger resonated through the space. Yuan's throne shook from the anger, but that was it. How could you? Not how you can do it. Just that you, believe me. Having the memories of Azathoth, this was the thing that surprised Eugene the most. Azathoth who loved the world so much. In the distant past that even the outers didn't know, he was the one who turned this world into a wasteland. So I'm not going to curse you for betraying me. If I were to blame you, it would be solely because of what you did to others. Why on earth no? How? The Nyarlathotep totem despaired. Are you still that great? Unlike himself, who had become so thin and small, Eugene seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. Even though he clearly had far more names than himself. Crack. The throne that Eugene, no, Azathoth was sitting on, cracked. No matter how many names you have. Crack, clack, clack. The cracks in the throne grew bigger and bigger. In the end, if I want, you will turn to dust like this. Are you thinking of disappearing? Looking at the throne that was cracking more and more, the Nyarlathotep totem asked. He knew very well the meaning of that throne. It was not a mere object, but the power of Azathoth itself. Azathoth always sat on that throne and controlled his power. But now, the throne was about to be destroyed. Azathoth. The essence of the name, itself. Even if it's you, if you lose all your names and try to use that much power. All names came from Azathoth. Even the devastated world, even the Nyarlathotep totem, even the greed of other names that started from it. Since Azathoth was the birth of all problems, Eugene had been thinking about this ending. Then it's only natural that I take it with me. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Eugene's figure, seen in the eyes of the Nyarlathotep totem, grew bigger and grander. It was not the powerless and small Azathoth who was deprived of the names left to them. The first time they met him, it was the figure of Azathoth who had all the names and was close to omnipotence. Crack, clack, Eugene glanced back at the throne of Azathoth behind him. I didn't mean to do it this quickly, but, wah. All the air around wrapped around the body of the Nyarlathotep totem. All the air around enveloped Nyarlathotep's body. Reacting to the changed flow of air for a moment. Crunch. Nyarlathotep was surprised by the teeth that bit his two legs, and quickly lowered his head. What the? Before he knew it, Nyarlathotep's two legs were being sucked into the bottomless abyss below. He tried to struggle somehow. But it was a futile resistance. In this, Azathoth was omniscient and omnipotent, and the names he possessed held no power. Time is running out, you see. Crunch, crunch. More than half of Nyarlathotep's body had disappeared. It would be fine if it were just his body, but the abyss that had drawn Nyarlathotep in was erasing his very essence, his name itself. As his existence faded away, Nyarlathotep uttered his last words of malediction. I hate you. Nyarlathotep recalled the time when he wandered, starving and lonely. I curse you. The power you have, your name, everything. Yes. Yuan nodded his head. Do as you please. Quad. And so Nyarlathotep completely disappeared from the world. Yuan watched the sight quietly. Nyarlathotep, a young child who had barely survived in a ruined world, starving and young. A guy who hated and wanted to change that world. An enemy who had taken and destroyed Yuan's world for that. He had no intention of blaming such a guy as a problem. In a way, it was just a twisted outcome, and the guy was just another victim. All the problems are still. Yuan closed his eyes for a moment. Now, it was time to decide who he was. Azathoth. Originally, he had tried to delay this moment as much as possible. However, an unexpected variable had arisen. Creak. The cracks in the golden throne grew wider. The time left until Azathoth's name was completely erased was about half a day. No matter how underestimated he was, the current Azathoth had lost most of his names. In that state, using the same power as in his prime with only one true name was bound to be followed by a lot of strain. There should still be time. Perhaps the destruction of the throne and his own annihilation would be simultaneous. Until the door closes. Chapter 522. Lightning Storm. Boom, crackle, rumble, hundreds, thousands of bolts of lightning poured down from the gathered flower of lightning. A skill powerful enough to instantly turn the tide of the battle. The allies who were fighting alongside him were stunned by the skill with its ridiculous range. As expected, there's no one like Zeus on a battlefield like this. Zeus's lightning was fundamentally different from Heracles, who gathered his lightning into one point and released it. If Heracles was more specialized in one-on-one combat, Zeus exerted overwhelming power in fights against many opponents like this. After all, it wouldn't be difficult for him to reduce a city to rubble if he wanted to. I don't really know what's going on. Michael, who was leading the rankers in place of the severely injured Iranian army, muttered. It seems like we've won. The king of Asgard has joined the battlefield. All abilities will increase. You will resist all negative effects. All. Odin was definitely dead, so how was this effect still being maintained? There was no need to try to understand it. He could do that later. For now, it was time to solidify this victory. Flap, swoosh, the wings on Michael's back spread open. As his pure white clothes and wings fluttered, magical energy began to pour out of his entire body. Whoosh, Michael's body shot forward, turning into the wind. The rankers, who had seized the opportunity to turn the tide of the battle, poured out their remaining stamina and magical energy. And in the middle of that, Pandora was swinging her fists at the outer gods, sweat dripping down her forehead. Bam, boom, Pandora's fist struck the outer god, which was made up of a mouth and a tail, and a hole appeared in its body. Then, all of a sudden, CAW, quote exclamation mark quote, a shadow loomed behind Pandora. It was another outer god, identical to the one Pandora had just defeated. Like twins, the identical creature opened its mouth wide to swallow Pandora whole. And in that moment, bam, boom, Heracles' fist slammed into the outer god's head. Rumble, Heracles, who had appeared with lightning, looked at Pandora. Pandora blinked her tense eyes as she looked at Heracles. Her face was familiar. Heracles, you have a good eye. You must be confused. In the midst of the chaos, Heracles stood there for a moment and looked at Pandora. He had heard stories about her while living on Olympus, but Pandora did not exist in the future. I'm glad I got to see you. You look good, really good. Heracles grinned and then jumped away with a bang. What the heck? Pandora had already been approached by several future rankers who had come to see her. It all started with Sun Ogong's words, Kim Yu-won's girlfriend. Of course, there were also those who wanted to see Pandora's appearance, who was known as the most beautiful woman in the tower. Just as she was about to regain her composure and fight again. Flicker, Pandora's eyes caught sight of a familiar figure. Yu-won, he shouldn't be here. Pandora rubbed her dusty eyes and tilted her head. She was sure she had seen him enter a white light. Click, 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 click. It was a sound she had not heard in a long time. Yu-won walked through the pure white light and listened to the sound. You actually made something like this. Yu-won looked around the path that connected the future and the present. This path probably wouldn't last forever. In fact, he could feel the space he was walking through in real time getting narrower. But even if that were the case, would it be possible to connect the two timelines, which cannot meet, as space? How many have I sacrificed for that? Cheek. As if continuing to tread on the empty void, for the first time, I felt the sensation of stepping on the ground. Along with that, color filled Yu-won's vision, and the world beyond the white path revealed itself. Hoo-oo, the exhilarating and suffocating air that stung the nose. The sky covered in dark purple. Kya, ooh, ooh. The spine-chilling cries of the outer gods. This world is entirely like this. For a moment, Yu-won looked around the ruined world like that. I killed Nyarlathotep. Shub-Niggurath is. The remaining names. Yu-won's lips curled up as he looked around them. You've done well, everyone. I thought I had left everything to Sun Ogong and returned to the past. Even during that time, they hadn't stopped. They continued to fight and prepare for the next. It's made things a lot easier. Yu-won's gaze rose to the sky. Now all that's left is. I thought I could finish it sooner than I expected. Above the purple sky, the nebula that sparkled like the universe shook violently. Yog-Sothoth, the sky of the world and the empty void that covered this world were trembling. It's been a long time since I've seen you, it's too soon. Between Azathoth and Kim Yu-won, somewhere in between. Yu-won looked at him with mixed feelings. They had given up this world because they couldn't do anything about this one guy. How did you? Ooh-ung. The nebula shook and the door inside it began to open. However, the door didn't open all the way. You don't have to come out the hard way. Cheek. The cracks in the golden throne grew further. I know what you were preparing for inside there anyway. Swaa. A great chaos covered the sky of the world. As if being sucked into an infinite gravity, the stars that made up the nebula were extinguished in the darkness. The same was true for Yog-Sothoth's ontology, which was in the center of the nebula. A filled square oath. Cutted. Yog-Sothoth, who had been sucked into the infinite gravity, disappeared without a trace. It must have been absurd from his perspective. From now the world, Azathoth, whom they themselves had killed and made to disappear, had appeared here all of a sudden. Whoosh. The sky, which had been covered in chaos, had changed into a dark night sky. If possible, I wanted the last sky I see would be the blue sky. Why does it have to be night? Crackle, buzz, the gold and the silver of the throne increased more and more. Yuan's vision blurred. I'm a close. Itzimet Thathakold seethed of himself. Yuan wanted to solve three things at the time with this decision. Azathoth, who had lost many names, regaining his power from his prime. And using that power to eliminate Yog-Sothoth in the future and naturally making Azathoth's name disappear completely. In the end, all three were successful. Only Azathoth's power could make Azathoth's name disappear. And now, he felt this effect from using too much power and his name was gradually disappearing. Crack, the throne He was sitting in, the throne of Thunhali King, was breaking apart, proving this. Thud, Yuan, who had come back down to the ground, started to walk down the passage. The path connecting time and time that Mimurad opened. While walking down that path, his body weakened. Thud, in the middle of the path connecting the timeline, filled with the clicking noise. Yuan collapsed somewhere that could be in the past, the future, or between the two. Anyway, with this idle I had Toto. The disappearance of anime. It was from the beginning when he first received Azathoth's name and his memories. Yuan had thought this kind of ending would come. There wasn't a problem. Right now, giving up Azathoth's name meant putting the future he had left behind at risk. No matter how much Azathoth was, he couldn't go beyond time and come and go to a different world line associated. That's why Yuan had decided to delay this moment for as long as possible. Until he was certain he could return to the future, he couldn't give up Azathoth's name. Crackle, from the tip of his feet, his body started to blur. What would happen if he gave up Azathoth's name? Will I disappear too? Even at this moment, he couldn't tell. Was she Kim Yuan, or Azathoth? If Azathoth disappears, will my own existence disappear completely? It was a question he couldn't be sure of himself. Would Azathoth disappear, or would they both disappear? Sitting there, murmuring, Wu Wan thought, name what was my name? Aza, thought, his name disappeared one letter at a time. And soon, even Wu Wan's name faded. His name disappeared. Only then did Wu Wan realize that his name was being erased. It meant that his existence was being forgotten by causality. Just like Kronos. So that's why that inspiration became like that. A hollow laugh escaped his lips. So that's why. Kronos, who had returned to the past using the clockwork, had become an outer. At the time, he didn't have the leisure to think deeply about the reason. Above all, Wu Wan was not the type to dwell on problems for which he could not find answers. But now he knew the reason why Kronos became an outer. It was because the people who remembered the name, Kronos, had disappeared. Only the traces he left behind remained. Emptiness that lost time. It was the name of Kronos, who had become an outer. Olympus, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and his history. Somewhere, because there were traces he left behind, Kronos was not completely erased. However, only the name, Kronos, had disappeared. The reason why Kronos, who had become like that, was able to fight Shub-Niggurath again with Wu Wan was one. It was because Wu Wan remembered his name. Then what about me? Wu Wan looked down at his hand, which had become transparent, and thought. What will happen to me? Perhaps if he were to disappear like this, he would meet the same end as Kronos. No one might remember him. Unlike Kronos, he had destroyed his own name, so it could lead to an even worse outcome. Probably 9 times out of 10, no. 100 out of 100, he would disappear like this. That was when it happened. What do you want to do when it's all over? A question that floated up from the depths of his memory. Wu Wan murmured at the question. Why did that bastard have to say something like that? Why is he making it so awkward at the end? Wu Wan couldn't finish his sentence. The one who was supposed to continue speaking had disappeared from that place. Chapter 523. We won. Sun Ogong's scream reverberated through the sky. His scream was a signal. Eek, we won. Ah. I survived, I survived. The joy of winning, the joy of survival. The rankers who were drunk on victory shouted. While they were shouting so loudly that the ground was shaking, Sun Ogong, who had shouted first, fell backward. Thud, there were no more enemies rushing in. His whole body relaxed with the tension and he couldn't do anything. Still, he felt good, and a hearty laugh escaped his mouth. Good job. You fought well, monkey. We did it, in the end. His colleagues approached Sun Ogong. As Sun Ogong burst into laughter, the figures of his colleagues gradually faded away. Let's go. Odin nodded at Sun Ogong's question. Time's up. The path is disappearing, so we have to go back. I'm fine. Unlike his colleagues who were fading away, Sun Ogong was fine. Unlike his colleagues who had forcibly opened the door and crossed over, Sun Ogong was completely subordinate to the timeline here. Sun Ogong clicked his tongue in regret. On the one hand, he was worried. What are you going to do about that? The fight here was won, but it was different on the other side. Yog Sothoth was still there, and there was no way to get over there from here. Mimir said, if we solve this side, everything will be better. It was an incomprehensible statement. Having studied the clockwork together, Odin had thought that the two worlds were completely separate since Zeus came to the future. But when he returned, everything would be better. I thought it was an unconnected parallel world, is it not? Or maybe that guy has another trick up his sleeve. We'll find out when we go back. Nevertheless, Odin believed Mimir's words. Odin and his colleagues' faith in Mimir was almost absolute. Nothing he had done so far, and nothing he had said with certainty, had been wrong. Yeah, if that guy said so. Sun Ogong nodded and lifted his upper body with difficulty. He couldn't bid farewell to his colleagues lying down like this. Goodbye, my friends. Whoosh. His colleagues, who were scattered all over the battlefield, disappeared. Sun Ogong watched their figures disappear with a faint halo with hazy eyes. Now it's really over. Really, that's what he thought. Wu Yun, Pandora, who had been looking around for someone since the end of the fight, approached Sun Ogong and asked. Where did he go? He had definitely appeared on this battlefield. Pandora was sure she hadn't seen the wrong thing. But Wu Yun was nowhere to be seen. A bewildered, stupid face as if to ask what that was. Usually, he thought that face was funny. Who? At that moment, Pandora felt that expression was creepy. Sun Ogong didn't remember Wu Yun. The fight was over. The tower had been through a period of great upheaval for quite some time. The death of Odin and the change of power between the giant guilds due to the war plunged the tower into another kind of chaos. Fortunately, it was Zeus, who had returned alive, who sorted out the chaos. From now on, Olympus will form an alliance with Asgard. The alliance of Asgard and Olympus. Although Odin was dead, Asgard's power remained. Olympus and Zeus joined them. A force with an irresistible power. Besides, Olympus didn't just have Zeus. Disputes to expand power are prohibited. Talk it out, talk it out. Now not only the Gigantomachia, but also Heracles, who had become a hero in the entire tower. I think I'm okay. If you want to fight, I'll be your opponent. So help me out. Sun Ogong, who was bored because he had no one to fight, became a mercenary for Olympus after being persuaded by Zeus. The overwhelmingly powerful guild was enough to suppress the fighting with its mere existence. In this way, Olympus began to play the role of a deterrent to the conflict of the tower, just as the old Asgard had done. Time passed like this. Crunch. Pandora put the well-toasted bread in her mouth and chewed it while basking in the sunlight. She was staying in a building owned by Olympus. That spacious mansion, worth millions of points, became Pandora's. Zeus did not spare his support for her. Of course, even after dozens of years had passed, she still resented Zeus. While Pandora was eating her meal of bread and stew, Hercules and Son Goku came to visit her house. What are you doing? It's a present. As soon as the door opened, Son Goku greeted her cheerfully, waving both arms, and Hercules handed her the gift bag he was holding. I wonder how many times this is. The two of them visited her once every few years. Every time he visited, Hercules brought her clothes or desserts she liked, such as cake. I heard that he's been working as a carpenter lately. Even if he earns points, he has nothing to spend them on, so he seems to donate most of his hard-earned points or use them to give gifts to someone like this. Bring Kim Yu-won. Quote question mark quote. Quote question mark quote. The two of them had the same expression on their faces. It was the same reaction this time too. Pandora closed the door, watching the two of them who still didn't remember. Get out if you don't know. Bam! The door slammed shut with a loud noise at her nervous gesture. Hercules muttered with a blank expression, looking at the door that had been closed in front of his nose. This is why the door creaks every time. Creak. At that moment, the door opened again. Pandora reached out her hand. Her outstretched hand headed towards the gift bag Hercules was holding. Pandora snatched the bag and closed the door again. Bam! It seemed that she wanted to receive the gift after all. Nevertheless, judging from the fact that she still didn't let them in, it seemed that she was still very angry. Judging from the fact that it had been unresolved for dozens of years. Who are you looking for? I don't know. Son Goku shrugged at Hercules' question. Nevertheless, the two of them did not try to find the name, Kim Yu-won, on purpose. There must be traces of him somewhere, even though he was the one who ended that fight dozens of years ago. No one tried to remember his name. Fools. Pandora grumbled and untied the gift bag Hercules had brought. The gifts Hercules had brought were various desserts, including cake and chocolate. Sweet desserts were Pandora's only hobby, who did not go outside the mansion. After learning that she liked sweets, the two of them always bought things like this as gifts. Do those two know why they're here? They probably don't know. Even though they're not that close, they keep taking care of her even after being treated like this. There was a reason. It's probably because of Yuan. Especially Hercules, who protected Pandora for Yuan in that war, so it made sense for him to take care of her like this. From the day Pandora declared that she would marry Yuan, Hercules called her his sister-in-law, mixing seriousness and jokes. But, they're really fools. They take such good care of her, but they don't remember Yuan's name. At the end of those unlikely actions, the two of them gave up thinking as soon as Yuan's name came up. As soon as the name, Kim Yuan, came up, they turned back without hesitation, despite the long journey. Really, the word, fool, suited them perfectly. Plop. Pandora took a bite of the cake and mumbled. Why can't you remember? Sob. Her hand stopped with one furkful. Even though she had waited for over 20 years, he still hadn't returned. Why did you disappear? She ended up sobbing as she ate the cake. She tried not to cry. She felt like she couldn't help but move her hand, so she started putting the cake in her mouth again. While doing so, Pandora kept repeating to herself, just in case. Kim Yuan, even if everyone forgets, I will never forget. And I will wait for the day when the person who opens that door is not Hercules or Sun Ogong, but the one I've been waiting for. Asterisk, 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 chikichkachakyachakyakoko choko, chikichkachakyachakyakoko choko. When you do bad things. Click. Yuan turned off the noisy alarm and got up with groggy eyes. They say you shouldn't use your favorite song as an alarm. Even though it was an old cartoon song that he had always enjoyed, it was too noisy to listen to in the morning. Yuan stretched and got up, checking his smartphone in his hand. 7:30 a.m. It was quite early in the morning compared to usual. He wanted to sleep a little longer, but he couldn't. He couldn't be late on the first day of school. Yuan hurriedly got out of bed and headed to the bathroom attached to the small one-room apartment. Shwa. After taking a lukewarm shower, he dried his hair with a towel and went outside. The school wasn't that far away. Thanks to securing a one-room apartment near the school, he was able to go to school without spending extra money on transportation. Of course, the monthly rent was more expensive than other one-room apartments. Yuan. As he went up the hill to the school gate, he heard his name being called from behind. He turned his head and saw his classmate, Han Da-eun, with her hair dyed a light brown, running towards him. Don't your legs hurt? I've been calling you from that far away, you jerk. Judging by her reaction, it seemed like she had been calling him from quite a distance. But he couldn't hear her because he had earphones in his ears, listening to music. That song again? Yeah, why do you listen to such a song that doesn't match your appearance? Da-eun pulled out one of the earphones in Yuan's ears and put it in her own ear, wondering if she was wrong. Chikichkachakyachakyakoko choko, chikichkachakyachakyakoko choko. If you do bad things. Perhaps it was the same. Yuan was listening to a cartoon song that had been aired when he and Da-eun were babies. An old cartoon based on Journey to the West, featuring Sun Ogong as the main character. Da-eun looked at Yuan, who was still listening to the cartoon song after the start of the semester, as if he was strange. What's wrong with my appearance? Your appearance is a bit like a gangster. But you're also handsome. Whatever. Why do you only listen to this? Is it a concept? Not just once in a while, but every day. Yuan listened to the same song over and over again. Even a cartoon song that didn't fit his generation. Some people thought he was strange because of that, but whatever. Handsome people tend to make friends no matter how peculiar they are. Moreover, Yuan had a good personality with no particular flaws, except for the fact that he listened to the same song over and over again. Because of Sun Ogong. Why Sun Ogong? I don't know, he just feels familiar. If that's the case, why don't you watch Draw X Bowl? That's a bit different, you know. After answering like that, Yuan took back the earphone that was in Da-eun's ear. The same song started playing in his ear again. Even though it was a song he had heard tens of thousands of times, Yuan listened to it again and again. Next to him, Da-eun talked to him. Yuan focused more on the song. Sun Ogong, Sun Ogong. As he listened to the song, Yuan kept thinking. Sun Ogong. He was clearly just a character in a cartoon in a myth called Journey to the West. But why? Yuan didn't feel like his name was a fictional character from a myth or a cartoon. I know it's weird. Nevertheless, Yu-won began to listen to this song obsessively at some point. It was because he felt like he would remember something if he kept listening to this song. Chapter 524. When class started, Woo-won took out the earphones he had in his ears and put them in his pocket. Class was boring. More than half of the students couldn't fight the drowsiness and let their heads drop as if they were told to go to a school, not a hospital, to cure their insomnia. Regardless, Woo-won listened to the professor's words. So, the meeting of the humanities and economics is something that we can often see in our society, which is humanities. He had come to this school according to his grades, and he had come to this department according to his grades. However, Woo-won focused on the class more than ever. Nike, the logo of the famous sports leisure brand, is commonly known as a crescent moon shape, but it is actually the side view of the wings of Nike, the goddess of victory in Greek mythology. The moment he heard that Nike doesn't have wings. Handon, who had been napping next to him, was startled and asked in surprise when he heard Woo-won's mumble that had come out of his mouth without thinking. Woo-won, who was startled, shook his head. Handon, who saw Woo-won pretending not to know and concentrating on the class, started to nod off again. Although he pretended to concentrate, Woo-won was confused. Again, Nike, the goddess of victory. He definitely didn't know her. In the first place, how could he know of the existence of a god? Regardless, Woo-won thought. Nike doesn't have wings. It wasn't a question mark, but a conviction. The problem was that he didn't know where this conviction came from. It's not once or twice. Whenever he heard stories about mythology, it was always like this. This strange sense of dissonance had continued since he was young. Creak. Woo-won got up from his seat. He put his earphones back in his ears and went outside. Handon, who had been dozing off throughout class, asked Woo-won, who was leaving with his bag. What's wrong? Are you leaving early? Why all of a sudden? Woo-won had rarely missed a class, so it was no wonder he was curious when he suddenly left class. I feel like it. What's with the puberty? Don't talk nonsense and go back to sleep. Creak. Woo-won opened the back door of the classroom and went outside. He walked down the school hill and started walking along the street. The sense of dissonance deepened as time passed. Screech. A bus stopped next to Woo-won. He saw a poster on the bus where people were getting on and off. A movie starring Thor, the Prince of Asgard. Ragnarok. It was a movie he had already seen. From the first day of its release, Woo-won had headed to the movie theater as if possessed by something. He felt like he would remember something else if he saw it. It was ridiculous. Far from remembering anything, his sense of dissonance only grew. Throughout the movie, Woo-won's only thought was this. Ragnarok isn't like that. It felt as if he had experienced Ragnarok. Of course, that was nonsense. Seriously, should I go see a shaman or something? Creak. The door closed and Woo-won went outside. Perhaps because it was in the mountains, the sound of birds chirping was particularly clear. An urgent voice could be heard from inside. Mansion Nim, why did he suddenly faint? I don't know. He was fine until this morning. Woo-won's heart became anxious at the conversation he heard from inside. Let's run away. Woo-won hurriedly ran down the mountain and looked up at the path he had run up while breathing heavily. He had gone to see a fortune teller because he thought he might remember his past life, but the fortune teller who met his gaze suddenly started foaming at the mouth and fainted. What the hell is going on? Because he had come quite far to find a famous shaman, it was getting late. When Woo-won hurriedly took the bus and arrived home, it was already completely dark outside. Thud. He threw his bag in a corner and lay down on the small bed without even taking off his socks. He kept feeling strange. As time passed, the more he heard names that he felt like he should know. This sense of dissonance grew stronger and stronger. Glance. Woo-won's gaze turned to the small table. A small box. It was the first thing he saw every time he came home. When was it? A few years ago, it was a gift that a woman he met on the street had suddenly given him. She was a beautiful woman with round eyes. Even famous celebrities would look like squids or frogs compared to her. You must never open it. Although it was a gift, she told him not to open it. You must be curious, too. I wonder what's inside that I'm absolutely forbidden from opening. If she wasn't my ideal type, I probably would have thrown it away a long time ago or ignored the warning and opened it. But even so, the reason I've kept it for several years and endured until now. It was because I fell for her at first sight. Furtively. Woo-won's gaze kept darting towards the box. I'm curious. A box that shouldn't be opened. What was this called again? Pandora's box, is it? As he muttered those words, one side of Yuan's chest ached. He couldn't bear it any longer. Bam! Yuan reached out and picked up the box and opened it. Unlike the time he spent waiting and worrying, the box opened easily. It was almost anticlimactic. What the heck? And just as it opened easily, the contents inside were just as anticlimactic. There's nothing here. There was nothing inside the box. Thud. Yuan checked the inside of the box and dropped it on the floor. A sigh escaped his lips. The bubbly, dreamy feeling he had when she handed him the box a few years ago had been doused with cold water. I guess I just threw away some trash. I got my hopes up for nothing. Yuan lay there in a daze for a while, staring up at the ceiling. As time went on, he felt even stranger. His eyes kept going to the box he had dropped on the floor. Furtively, he had clearly checked with his own eyes that there was nothing inside. What am I doing? Yuan picked up the box again and checked inside. No matter how he looked at it, it was an empty box. He turned it upside down and shook it, but not even a speck of dust came out. Still, he felt like he wouldn't be able to shake off this nagging feeling unless he checked it even more, so Yuan brought the box close to his eyes and checked it thoroughly. There's still nothing. Yuan's muttering stopped. On the bottom of the box, something faint could be seen. The more he concentrated, the clearer it became. Orange hair and beautiful features. It was the woman who had given him this box in the middle of the street. She was wearing a red sundress and had a piece of cake in her mouth. Tears streaming down her face, she kept muttering someone's name. Yuan, Kim. Her voice could be heard from inside the box. The name she was muttering was his own. And the moment he heard that voice, Yuan realized the source of the sense of dissonance he had been feeling. He still hadn't forgotten. Kim Yuan, the one who had given him this box. Kim Yuan. Knock, knock. Someone knocked on Pandora's mansion. Pandora, who was sitting at the table muttering the same name, hurriedly went outside. It was to check who had knocked on the door. Yuan. Are you Pandora? He was a man with a sensual, copper-colored skin. Holding a bouquet of flowers in his hand, he knelt on one knee and held out his other hand to her. A high ranker of Diva, Varuna, formally asked for your hand in. Soon after, a shadow fell over his face. Bzzz. Clang. Varuna flew up into the sky as a star. It wasn't worth listening to anymore. Pandora, who had thrown a punch in one breath, brushed off her hands and closed the door. It was a common occurrence. Guys who heard that the tower's top beauty lived in a secluded mansion and came to court her without thinking. The next one, and the one after that was the same. Every time, Pandora would swing her fist without fail and blow away such unwelcome guests. I don't care who it is. The only two who stopped at verbal abuse were Swish, Son Goku and, like now, Hercules, who always came with a cake in his hand. There are also people who wait like this. Pandora made a puzzled expression. Hercules asked, his eyes wide open at her expression. Why, do I look like I'm waiting? Well, aren't you? That was true. However, he was just curious because Hercules had never mentioned anything like this before. Varuna just flew away. That guy, he's a bit of a wimp, but he's popular because he's handsome. Hercules asked with a grin. There was a playful look on his face. Do you like the guy who's waiting for you? Yeah. Pandora nodded and replied, I'm going to marry him. I'm going to get married. A scene overlapped in Hercules' mind. For some reason, Pandora's words felt different this time. Dumbfounded, Heracles regained his senses at Pandora's voice. Why? No. Heracles shook his head. Nothing. Really? Pandora sighed, as if she had been expecting something. She thought it would be different this time. But in the end, it was the same reaction. Heracles talked to her for a while in front of the door and turned around. Pandora watched him go for a while before turning around. Creak. The door closed slowly. Thud. For the past few decades, Pandora had never let anyone into this room. She wished that the first person to cross this door would be the one she had been waiting for. Pandora had just returned home and was about to eat the cake she had received as a gift when someone knocked on the door again. Knock, knock. Someone knocked on the door again. Heracles had just left. If it was Son Goku, he would have been making a lot of noise instead of knocking politely. It was an unwelcome knock. But she couldn't ignore it. TCH. She had been feeling a little better since she was finally going to eat the cake that Heracles had brought her. She walked briskly with a fork in one hand, thinking that her time had been interrupted. Pandora vowed, this time, I won't blow you away. I'll stab you with a fork. With that, Pandora nervously reached out and opened the door. Bang! Who again? Pandora's eyes widened as she checked the face of the visitor, wondering who else it was. Under the bright sunlight, Yuan looked down at Pandora. From your reaction, it seems like a lot of people have come. He looked the same as always, even though he had rotted inside. Even though she had been waiting for him, Pandora froze on the spot, not knowing what to say or how to react. There were so many things she wanted to ask. Where have you been? Why are you here now? Why don't you remember me at all? There were so many questions that she couldn't say anything. There was an awkward silence for a moment. I feel like I'm asking something obvious, but... Yuan opened his mouth awkwardly, with a hint of worry. My name, do you remember? Just as he was about to ask. Thud, Pandora rushed in and hugged his neck. Yuan. As if he had already heard the question. She shouted his name at the top of her lungs. Asterisk, 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 I had a strange dream. Yuan slowly told his dream. He was a student there. In that world, Son Goku was revered as a god from the myth of Journey to the West, and a comic book was made with him as the main character. The funny and catchy song, Chiki Chaka Chakoko, was still ringing in his ears. Come to think of it, Son Goku was very popular in that world. There must have been dozens of different comics with his name as the main character. Son Goku's shoulders twitched as he listened to the story. He looked at Heracles and shrugged his shoulders as if to say, look at that guy. The comic book series set in Olympus was published in dozens of volumes. The comic book, Mythology of Olympus, which had more than 10 volumes, was a bestseller with over 10 million copies sold. At this point, Heracles felt a little sorry for himself, wondering why he wasn't the main character. The movie starring Thor became a worldwide sensation. The actor who played the role won the award for Best Action Actor at the film festival the following year. Unfortunately, the main character was not Odin. In addition, in the world of Yuan's dream, countless stories of guilds were spread everywhere and became a part of people's lives. That's how Pandora, Heracles, and even Son Goku came to be. When Yuan told his dream in front of the four of them, Son Goku was the first to chuckle and say, where in the world is there such a world? Leveling with the gods, the end. Chapter 525. It's already been 10 years. The administrators gathered in one place. The 100th floor, the highest floor in the tower. High in the sky above the clouds of the world, the administrators talked. Filled square, filled square, filled square, filled square has disappeared. A great being whose name could not even be mentioned. It took a whole 10 years to confirm that he had completely disappeared. And finally, they came to one conclusion. Do we still need players? This was the reason why the administrators had gathered. Now that there were no longer any enemies threatening the tower, they were discussing whether the existence of players was still necessary. Olympus, Asgard, Veda, and the Demon King. The administrator of the 100th floor listed the names. The giant guilds that ruled the tower. The administrators were the ones who managed the tower, but the ones who actually reigned over the world were the many giant guilds and the high rankers belonging to those guilds. There are too many obstacles. Obstacles. They had certainly been the protagonists of the war against the Outer 10 years ago, but now that the great beings Azathoth and Yog-Sothoth were gone, the situation was different. It won't be easy to get rid of them. At least Odin is dead. But there's still Zeus, and Son Goku and Heracles. More of them should have died in the war. Too many of them survived. The administrators chattered. However, there were some among them who had expressions of displeasure. Shouldn't we discuss whether it's right to maintain the tower? The administrators' gazes gathered on the owner of the voice. The administrator of the tutorial. Following him, several administrators began to express the opinions they had been keeping to themselves. I disagree. I don't think we should go that far. There's no need to destroy the tower. The tower is more stable than ever in its current state. The players aren't rebelling against us. I don't care. I'm satisfied with the way things are. Opinions were divided. Some of the administrators rose from their seats and turned away. The number of administrators who disappeared into the clouds like that was just over 20. Tisk, the administrator of the 100th floor clicked his tongue. It was unfortunate, but there was nothing he could do about it. They had already maintained this world for far too long. During that time, administrators who truly wished for the good of the tower had also emerged. However, the trend is on our side. The administrators nodded at his mutter. They had no intention of forcibly dragging their changed colleagues along. Fortunately, most of the administrators had not forgotten their original intentions. We've waited long enough. The administrator of the 100th floor spoke as if he were making a declaration. Now it's our turn to be the masters. A long time, thousands, tens of thousands of years. The beings who had been managing the tower for so long began to move again. But there was just one. They had forgotten about one person. The first floor was the only world in the tower where there was no administrator. The world that had once collapsed due to Outer's raid quickly regained its original appearance thanks to large guilds including Olympus. In any case, the first floor was the world where you set foot for the first time after passing the tutorial, so it could not be left alone. Thanks to that, 10th floor Murum World's specialty, peaches from Xi'an-san for sale. If you eat this, you too. Yes, yes, the sword of the Valkyries that Asgard is proud of. Only one in stock, come and take a look. Olympus specialty, high ranker Dionysus, wine. Hey, kid, why are the seeds so small? This isn't 20 years old. The world of the first floor regained its vitality. Gulp. A man in a shirt walked towards the store where the shopkeeper was having a tug of war with a customer over 10-year-old peaches. The noisy store became quiet in an instant. The shopkeeper carefully observed the customer's appearance. It was to see if he was a customer with a lot of money or not. Do you have peaches here? At the customer's request, the owner took his attention away from the other customer he had been arguing with until just now and put his hands together. Oh my, of course. We have a wide variety, from 10 years old to 100 years old. What's 100 years? Look, do you think this is 20 years old? This is a complete scam. It's about 8 years old. As the customer muttered after checking the roots of the peach, the shopkeeper's face, which had been laughing, turned cold. 8 years. The customer in front of him had just looked at the condition of the peach and knew exactly how old it was. And then he went a step further. I heard that they succeeded in cultivating them on the upper floors these days. They're coming out pretty well. He even knew about the news from the upper floors. How much is this? The shopkeeper, who met his black eyes, flinched. He couldn't just rip him off like the previous customer. Please give me 100 points. What? It was 300 points just now. Ignoring the protesting customer, the man held out his hand. 100 points. It wasn't a small amount of money, but peaches were a kind of elixir that gave magical power. It wasn't cheap for 100 points, but it wasn't expensive either. 100 points acquired. After receiving the points, the shopkeeper handed over the peach right away. Watching the customer put the peach in his inventory, the shopkeeper sighed in relief. Phew, fortunately, if he had threatened to report to the management office for selling fake potions, he would have had no choice but to hand over the peach for free. Just as he was about to breathe a sigh of relief. Oops, he remembered someone he had forgotten and shifted his gaze. There was more than one customer. The shopkeeper found out that he had sold the fake peach, and so did the customer who had come before. However, strangely enough, he was looking at the spot where the customer who had just bought the peach had left, not at the shopkeeper. Why are you doing that? Why do you say that? Asked the merchant carefully, thinking that he might be able to get away with it. My guest, you look familiar somehow. He replied with a thoughtful expression. He looks familiar. It was an abstract statement. However, at those words, the merchant recalled the face of the guest who had just bought the Hasuo. He hadn't recognized him properly because he had been so flustered. Now that you mention it, so do you. You too. Yes, but I can't remember it well. Black hair isn't that common in the tower. So the two of them thought about the guest who had just passed by for a while. In the end, they couldn't remember, but... Creak. As he opened the door, Yu-Won paused for a moment. The door, which should have opened smoothly, creaked. I need to fix that. Don't you know how? Yu-Won turned his head at the sound of heavy footsteps. Hercules walked out of the house. Sun Wukong's clones were cleaning the house, and Pandora was eating the chocolate cake that Hercules had bought. Just leave it. I'll fix it. You go boil that samgyetang. It's samgyetang. What about the Hasuo? Here. It's a waste to boil it in soup. This is all I have to replace it with. It must be a panacea for the guys who just came up to the first floor. Hercules, who checked the Hasuo that Yu-Won showed him, picked up a small hammer in his hand. The hammer, which was the size of a fist, looked very small in his hand. Anything today? Anyone recognize you? No, it's about time they noticed. It took you guys over a year, though. It took a year for Sun Wukong and Hercules to remember Yu-Won. At first, the two of them kept visiting the house to meet Pandora. The reunion was not so pleasant. Who was this guy? A boyfriend. Hercules and Sun Wukong didn't recognize Yu-Won right away. Pandora was the only one who recognized Yu-Won as soon as she saw him. Fortunately, as time passed, the two of them felt a little more sense of dissonance. What is it? The memory came suddenly one day. Sun Wukong, who had come unexpectedly with Hercules, opened his mouth wide as he looked at Yuan. Yuan's face suddenly came to mind. What is it? Have you been acting like an idiot for a day or two? Why didn't you tell us? This was Hercules' question. Yuan replied while drinking tea with Pandora. It's not going to get any faster if I tell you. What about Pandora? She remembered a long time ago. I have no face. The two of them looked at Yuan's face several times, and it took a long time for them to finally remember. Of course, no one in the tower remembered Yuan's name. There was a record, but no one bothered to look at it and think about who Yuan was. That was still the case even now, 10 years after the end of the war with the Outer. Are we going to keep living like this? Sun Ogong was rolling around on the sofa. Yuan, who had been preparing food by putting chicken in Hasuoin boiling water, nodded his head in his question. What's wrong with that? Are you really not resentful? You could at least act like a hero. Heracles, who had just finished fixing the door, looked up at the ceiling of the house. It wasn't small, but it wasn't overflowing either. If he had the points that Yuan had, he wouldn't even have enough to build a castle on the first floor. Do you remember the conversation that day? That day. Heracles, who had a puzzled expression for a moment, was able to recall Yuan's words. I wanted on nothing the most. Enjoying free time or just sleeping. Not planning anything, not moving busily. After remembering those words, Heracles looked around the house again. What Yuan wanted to do the most. It wasn't her. Just leave it alone, he's satisfied with it. But the wedding is coming up soon, so a lot of people will come. Hey, Sun Ogong. Heracles, who was mentioning the upcoming wedding, turned to Sun Ogong and shouted. Sun Ogong's doppelgangers, who were trying to eat the chicken from the samgyetang that was boiling hot, screamed in surprise. Ah, let me just try one bite. When you take a bite, it's not just a bite. Even if you're a doppelganger, get rid of it, you bastard. You eat more than me. You're the size of an orc chieftain. Are you done talking now? Pandora, stop eating the cake and eat your meal now. You too, if you're going to fight, go outside and fight. The house is going to collapse. The house was noisy. Yuan sighed and began to put the food in dishes. Pandora, with chocolate on her hands, came over and helped Yuan. Should I kick them out? Pandora, who had taken the tray and plate, looked up at Yuan and asked. Behind them, the two were still fighting. Sun Ogong and Heracles. They were high rankers who could blow away an entire house with just their breath if they wanted to. Thanks to them, the two had already destroyed 2 houses. Yuan had already made up his mind that if they destroyed one more house, he would never let them come over again. Just leave them alone, let's move while we're at it. Yuan shrugged and began to set the table with Pandora. The atmosphere in the house was noisy. Yuan looked at Sun Ogong and Heracles growling at each other, and Pandora. They were insane. There was no need to be more greedy. Clang, the sound of a plate breaking. That's okay. The house didn't break, it's enough to live like this. There was only one thing to worry about. The reality of this world that he learned through Azathoth's memories. That is, if only those bastards would just leave me alone. Thud, clang. Yuan put down the tray he was holding and drew the sword he had in his inventory. To stop those bastards, we definitely can't use words. Chapter 526. Fortunately, the house was safe. Heracles, who found Yuan with his sword drawn, first took the dentures from Sun Ogong and settled the matter. And that night, Heracles got up from his seat, saying that he had to go earlier than usual. My father has summoned me. Zeus, what's going on? He even summoned me directly. Sun Ogong, you too. Me too. No, Heracles and Sun Ogong. Zeus had called both of them at the same time. Currently, Olympus had emerged as a giant guild in the tower, surpassing Asgard. It was thanks to the fact that the rankings of Zeus and Heracles had risen much higher than before. Sun Ogong was, so to speak, a mercenary of Olympus. In the tower, which was in turmoil due to Odin's death, there was hardly any force that could defy Olympus, which had Sun Ogong and Heracles. It seems it's not an ordinary matter. Yuan felt an unusual current in Zeus's call. If it was Heracles, who belonged to Olympus, he wouldn't know, but if he called Sun Ogong, who was difficult to manage on his own, it meant that he needed a helping hand. I may not be able to come for a while. You've come too often anyway. Yuan sent the two of them away without regret. He wasn't going to be lonely. He wasn't alone anymore. In the early morning when the two left, Yuan headed to the garden as usual. There was no particular reason. It was like a habit he had continued since before he returned using the clockwork. Swoosh, he repeated the steady inhalation and exhalation. His consciousness sank deep beneath his sleep and soon reached another world. There, Yuan fought every morning. Thump, at first, with Sun Ogong holding the Rui Bang. Whoosh, boom, next, with Heracles wielding the thunderbolt-wrapped cudgel. Sometimes he faced both of them at the same time, and sometimes he fought Zeus or Odin. Boom, boom, deep beneath his sleep, Yuan's thunderbolt clashed with Zeus's. Thunderbolts were originally Zeus's specialty. Unlike Yuan, who used the heart of Uranus to handle thunderbolts, Zeus was a ranker who handled the thunderbolt attribute's magic power from the beginning. It was difficult to fight Zeus with just thunderbolts. However, my forte wasn't thunderbolts in the first place. Yuan's forte was versatility, making the most of it was Yuan's greatest advantage. Pow! Yuan dug into Zeus's arms, who was throwing thunderbolts. In one hand, he held the Kusanagi sword, to cut the thunderbolt, and in the other, he held the Yata mirror, to deflect the thunderbolt. And then, creak, the world distorted with the sound of a door opening. Yuan's senses rose back above his sleep. The cool morning air brushed against his face, cooling his hot sweat. Chirp, the moment he heard the sound of birds, he realized for sure. His concentration was broken, and at the same time, his fight with Zeus had become a mirage and disappeared. A guest, Sun Ogong and Heracles had already returned. They said they had something urgent to do, so they wouldn't be back in a day. If so, there was only one person who would visit this house. That guy again. Aphrodite, Tsukuyomi, Pandora. If there were beautiful women representing the tower, there were bound to be handsome men representing the tower as well. Varuna was the most popular among such handsome men. It was because of his sociability and high ranking. And he, Pandora, had been deeply infatuated with one woman lately. You are still beautiful today. No, it had been too long to say lately. Varuna knelt on one knee and carefully raised a bouquet with both hands. In front of him stood Pandora, rubbing her sleepy eyes with one hand. Oh, it's you again. Pandora, who had always slept a lot in the morning, glanced at Varuna as she yawned. How many times was this? Even after she had refused him, Varuna would come back to her house after a few months had passed. It was a terrible obsession. Do you want to die? If I were to lose my life to your lovely hands, then that too would. Ha, I really can't kill him. Pandora pouted as she rubbed her head. She realized that just blowing him away was no longer enough to get rid of this leech that was in front of her. Thud, footsteps could be heard from afar. It was still far away, but Pandora could tell that Yuan was walking towards her from the garden behind the house. You're going to get into big trouble at this rate. I've put everything on the line. Pandora shook her head as if looking at an insect at Varuna's fierce gaze. And then, thud, Yuan arrived between the two. I don't know. Varuna's gaze turned to Yuan at the sound of footsteps approaching. Who are you? Whoosh. Varuna's magic power spread around him. A cold gaze and white pupils turning blue. Soon, water vapor swirled in his hand, and a bowstring appeared. Who are you to be coming out from her house? You still like to weigh things in front of women. What? It's nice to see that you're consistent. Both in the past and now. A smile hung on Yuan's lips. But you've gone too far. Until now, Pandora had blown Varuna away without a second thought. It was her own way of rejecting him. But even so, Varuna had continued to search for her. Who are you? Her husband. The answer came from Pandora, not Yuan. Varuna's eyes wavered. Husband? Did Pandora have a husband? Varuna glared at Yuan's face. Yuan's face with black hair and eyes was not common, but it was completely ordinary compared to Varuna. But why? I feel like I've seen him somewhere. Varuna felt like Yuan's face was familiar. But he couldn't remember, no matter how much he searched his memories. In the end, Varuna asked, thinking that there must have been someone who looked like him. Then, if I defeat the interest, will you accept my proposal? Yuan sighed at Varuna's eyes that were burning with jealousy. It seemed that this guy didn't remember either. At times like this, he felt uncomfortable that his name and face as Kim Yuan had been forgotten. Pandora, yeah, I'll be back in a bit. Pandora nodded at Yuan's soft voice and asked. What about dinner? I'll eat first. No, I'll wait. Was that conversation stimulating? How dare this guy in front of you? This isn't the right place. Thud, quote. Varuna's vision was blocked by a palm. Let's move for now. His body floated up like a feather. He realized that his head was being held by Yuan and that he was floating up into the sky when he was already in the clouds. Boom, clang, bang, thud. Varuna, who had been thrown onto the ground, staggered and quickly got up. The two had flown far away from the city to a wasteland. This is ridiculous. Me, to that nameless guy. Varuna looked at Yuan with a confused expression. He couldn't understand the current situation at all. Rank 516. It wasn't a low rank by any means. He was far from Pandora, a high ranker in the double digits, but in this vast tower, it was never easy to find someone stronger and more influential than Varuna. Furthermore, if such a being existed, their name or face should be known. At first, you were just a little annoying. Yuan approached Varuna with a sigh. But I don't know why, but it gradually started to irritate me. 10 years. It was the time he had spent living under the same roof as Pandora. More than anything else, she was the only one who remembered him out of the 100 worlds. Yuan accepted Pandora's heart after 3 whole years had passed. And during that time, Varuna had constantly searched for Pandora. Snap out of it, Varuna. If you don't stop here, you'll be in big trouble. What nonsense are you talking about? Splash. A torrent of water erupted around Varuna. He was a ranker who manipulated the power of water. Varuna created a gigantic blue bow in his hand and quickly aimed an arrow at Yuan. My name is Varuna. I don't know what kind of countryside ranker you are, but state your name. Kim Yuan. Kim Yuan. Is there a ranker with that name? I'm not a ranker. I'm not registered in the rankings. It wasn't just the players and rankers who had forgotten his name. The residents of the tower, the administrators who managed the tower, and the errand boys who worked under them. They had all forgotten Yuan as well. So it was only natural that Yuan's name would disappear from the rankings managed by the Ranking Management Bureau, which was managed by the administrators and errand boys. Not a ranker. Varuna's forehead twitched. Yuan's words had provoked him once more. Someone who wasn't even a ranker had picked a fight with him. And that he had been flown all the way here after being caught by that kind of guy. And that same guy had dared to stay by Pandora's side. Swoosh. A cool magical power wrapped around the area. A water wave resembling a dragon wrapped around the arrow. Creak. The bowstring was pulled back. With his blue eyes gleaming, Varuna opened his mouth. I won't take your life. Instead, stay quietly by her side. You're not someone who should be with her. She is. Varuna, who had paused for a moment, bit his lip and spoke in a sorrowful voice. Well, I might not be someone who should be with her either. A voice that was full of self-pity. Just hearing it made his blood boil. Thinking about it, he hadn't been on such good terms with Varuna in the future either. It was probably because of that sentimental personality of his. There were many times when he would hit on Callie and get beaten up. It was Callie who had straightened out that personality of his. She had half killed Varuna for hitting on her. But she hadn't killed him because everyone had been precious back then. I guess I need to fix you up a bit here, Varuna. It seems like you've gained some confidence from your stroke of luck earlier. I like that kind of confidence, but hot. Bam, thud. Varuna was surprised by the burning sensation he felt on his cheek and rubbed it with one hand. At that moment, he realized what it was. Should I tell you something? Crackle, crackle. Above Varuna's blue waves that wrapped around the area. A golden wave of electricity enveloped the sky. Water and electricity are polar opposites. Just because they're rare attributes doesn't mean you won't ever run into them. Rumble, rumble. Dark clouds covered the sky. A gigantic spear of lightning was wrapped around Yuan's hand. Even for someone as clueless and full of confidence as Varuna, he couldn't help but realize that the situation was strange. What? Varuna took a step back in confusion. And towards that Varuna, he slowly walked. Tick, tick. With his other hand that wasn't holding the spear, Yuan leisurely sent a text to Pandora. It looked like he would be a bit late. Chapter 527. Og. A scream echoed across the vast wasteland. Varuna, who had been struck by a bolt of lightning from the sky, collapsed to the ground, his body trembling. Get up. Eep. Thud. At Yuan's command, Varuna jumped to his feet. His face, from his forehead to his chin, was charred black, clearly showing how much Varuna had suffered. Follow me. Yes. From now on. From now on. You will not harass women who reject you. 10 times. I will not harass women who reject me. I will not harass women who. Before they knew it, the sun was setting. Varuna, who had spent the past half day being electrocuted and burned, had to face the brink of death every moment. I will not harass them. That's enough. Stop. Yuan nodded in satisfaction as Varuna, who had finally bowed his pride and repeated her words. Varuna knelt on the ground and collapsed, all the strength leaving his body. There was no sense of humiliation or shame. In the first place, the opponent in front of him was too strong to feel such things. What the hell is this guy? Varuna glanced at Yuan's face. No matter how much he looked, he couldn't remember her. However, the more he looked, the more he felt a sense of déjà vu, as if he had seen her face somewhere before. Somehow, my instincts can't be wrong. He's definitely a guy with a secret. The unidentified powerhouse who was with Pandora. He was even thorough enough to avoid the eyes of the ranking management bureau. I have to report this to Vishnu Nim as soon as I get back. Anything else you want to say? Gulp. Varuna's body trembled slightly. After suffering for half a day, his mind was filled with more fear of Yuan than information about Pandora. Just as Yuan had hoped. Ah, no, do you plan to report to Vishnu as soon as you get back? As if she could see right through him, Yuan bent down and spoke mockingly. Vishnu will be so happy. To hear that a ranker from his guild was beaten up by a woman who already has a man and came crying to him. Varuna's eyes shook at Yuan's words. Varuna, if you tarnish Diva's name again with women, then, know this, you will be imprisoned in the Asura's purgatory for 1,000 years. Creepy. Cold sweat dripped down Varuna's forehead. Varuna was already known for causing trouble by chasing women. It hadn't even been a few years since he had been warned for it. But if, in addition to the women problem, the high ranker of Diva was defeated by a player who wasn't even a ranker, I might not be imprisoned for 1,000 years, but for eternity. In that chilling situation, if, creak, Yuan approached and pointed the tip of the lightning spear in her hand between Varuna's legs. If you come looking for me again, this will disappear. Swoosh. Yuan's jet black murderous intent enveloped Varuna's body. Soon, black energy was swirling around Varuna. Sensing something, Varuna's gaze turned to the ground. Beneath the ground, which had turned like water, deep down, an endless darkness stared up at him. Hiek. Varuna's face turned white and he nodded his head repeatedly. Yuan didn't know if he had really listened to her, but she stopped there. If he ignored her warning and came looking for her again, she planned to lock him up in Tartarus. After a few years of rotting in Tartarus, he'll come to his senses. Of course, if that happened, Varuna would really regret it. Because I like you, rather than being imprisoned in Diva's Asura realm. Tisk, tisk. Scattering the lightning he had gathered in his hand, Yuan turned halfway when he suddenly remembered something and looked back at Varuna. Ah, that's right, he had only looked at him, but Varuna trembled at Yuan's gaze. Because he thought that he might change his mind and attack him immediately. And to Varuna, Yuan lowered his body and brought his face closer to his and asked. Do you remember me? Yes. Varuna looked momentarily absent-minded at the unexpected question. But soon, he began to seriously ponder over Yuan's question. His face, which he had felt familiar with since their first meeting. Yuan's question meant that the sense of familiarity wasn't just an illusion. Varuna's contemplation lasted for several minutes. But in the end, he failed to remember Yuan. However, I think I've seen you somewhere. You think you've seen me? Yes, but I don't remember. Is that so? Yuan didn't look that disappointed. I think I've seen you somewhere. That was enough for now. That's fine. Varuna ran away as soon as Yuan gave him permission to leave. It didn't matter if he went back to the guild and reported what had happened with Yuan or not. Even if they were to judge right or wrong, Vishnu wouldn't have taken Varuna's side. Yuan was concerned about something else. I think I've seen you somewhere. It wasn't just something he said. From the moment he first made eye contact with Varuna, he had looked at Yuan with a puzzled look. That wasn't all. When I went to the market yesterday. That customer, I think I've seen him somewhere. The merchants and customers he met at the market. Among the people he made eye contact with, there were quite a few who couldn't take their eyes off him. Furthermore, the meaning of saying that they had seen him somewhere was only one thing. Are my memories slowly coming back? He didn't think this phenomenon would be permanent in the first place. But it was sooner than he thought. He had thought that his memories might not come back even after a few decades, or even a few hundred years. It's too fast. He was half happy and half regretful. Yuan was a human being, so he didn't like it when everyone forgot him. But anyway, Pandora, Son Goku, and Hercules still remembered him, and he still liked this quiet life for now. Thud. Yuan returned home. He had spent more time with Varuna than he thought. Looking up at the sky, the sunset was already beginning to set from the other end. Is it already evening? It had been a while since he had been apart from Pandora for so long. Thanks to Hercules fixing it yesterday, the door opened smoothly. As he entered the house, the first thing he saw was the living room on the first floor. Pandora was sitting in the living room. The table was set with cold soup, bread, roasted potatoes, and meat. Yuwon's food was on the other side. Did you eat dinner? It's breakfast. Quote. Yuwon, who was wondering what he meant by evening when the sun was already setting, soon understood his words and asked. You didn't eat? Yeah, the table in front of him was not dinner but a breakfast table. He said he would wait without eating. It seemed that he hadn't eaten a single meal until now. You can stop waiting. Pandora had already waited for him for quite a long time. When everyone had forgotten him, she was alone. She waited and waited for him without taking a step out of the house. It was shorter than that time, but it was the same this time. He said he would wait without eating, but who would have thought he would really starve himself all this time? You could have eaten first. Because I like you. Pandora let out a bright laugh as she cut off Yuwon's words. I like Yuwon, and I like waiting for Yuwon. She likes waiting. Yuwon's heart softened at those words. Why on earth does she like him this much? Ignoring Yuwon's blank expression, Pandora glanced over the table with cold food. Everything's cold. Should I heat it up again? No, I'm fine. Really? Clang. Only then did Pandora lift up the utensils. Yuwon sat across from her and began eating together. The food was cold, but the meal was more delicious than ever. A month before the wedding, eating the food she prepared together, Yuwon finally became certain. Now, she's his other half. Varuna quickly returned to Diva. Although his body wasn't healed, the first thing he had to do was get as far away from the first floor as possible. He spent days going up to the top of Diva's ship. During those few days, Varuna thought about Yuwon. What he should do with him. How he could defeat him. Whether he should report to Diva, or not. As he thought more and more about Yuwon. It's strange no matter how I think about it. Varuna let out a sigh of regret on the bow of the ship. Why did I even mess with Kim Yuwon? Varuna's head, which had been trembling, recalled Yuwon's appearance. He had lightning wrapped around his body and used kusanagi to cut through the water arrows he had created. That wasn't a fight. He wasn't an opponent he could fight in the first place. Kim Yuwon, who was he? Wasn't he the hero who defended the tower from the Outer's invasion 10 years ago? What Yuwon showed in his fight with him was only a fraction of his abilities. He had messed with Yuwon's woman, so maybe he was lucky not to die. The moment his thoughts continued, Varuna felt something strange. Clearly, just a moment ago, he thought of him as an enemy and was afraid of him. That guy was Kim Yuwon. He muttered as if he had just realized, but that wasn't it. My name is Varuna. I don't know what kind of rural ranker you are, but tell me your name. Kim Yuwon. Kim Yuwon. Was there a ranker with that name? He had clearly stated his name. However, he couldn't recall the name Kim Yuwon, a name that anyone living in the tower would know, let alone a rural ranker. At that moment, what is this? Numerous questions ran through Varuna's head. Why couldn't he remember him? Why did the world forget him? After a moment of contemplation, Varuna took out his kit and called someone. What's going on? Vishnu's voice. Varuna first greeted the great being who ruled Diva. Have you been well? What trouble did you cause again? Yes. What did I? You always cause trouble, with women. Varuna's expression turned gloomy. It wasn't wrong, and he couldn't argue back. Above all, arguing with Vishnu was something that couldn't happen in Diva. Anyway, you didn't cause any trouble, I suppose. Yes. Then what's the matter? There's something I'd like to ask you, Vishnu. What is it? Varuna became nervous at the thought. Soon, he asked the question. Do you remember Kim Yuwon? Kim Yuwon, who's that? A questioning voice. The moment Varuna replied, yes, to the unnatural question. Is that all you wanted? Varuna's eyes shook at Vishnu's words. Chapter 528. I wonder if you're just doing useless things again. Do you not remember? Why are you asking me about that guy? Varuna trailed off at the question thrown back at him. That was because, to explain the reason, he had to talk about how he had endlessly courted Pandora for the past 10 years. Do you have nothing to say? No, it's fine if you don't know. Really? Vishnu seemed suspicious for a moment and stayed silent. But soon, he must have thought they had nothing more to talk about, and the call was disconnected. Got it. Then I'll hang up. Click. Varuna stared blankly at the kit that had become a blank screen. His head became complicated as he thought about what was going on. Vishnu, the owner of Diva, was known to have quite a relationship with Kim Yuwon. Even Vishnu didn't remember Kim Yuwon. Varuna shouted after struggling with his thoughts. Sir, turn the car around. The world of the 25th floor. Britannia, the country ruled by the guild, Round Table. At its heart was the sacred Round Table where 100 knights sat. But today, the masters of the Round Table were not the 100 rankers, but the absolutes of various guilds. They're late. When have those guys ever kept their appointments? The main character always shows up last, isn't that what they say? Several rankers sat around the Round Table. Gawain, who had recently become the master of the Round Table. Merlin, the guardian of the Round Table. Thor, the new king of Asgard. Lion King and Kali, Divas Vishnu. Numerous stars had gathered in one place. Gulp, the knights of the Round Table guarding the area swallowed nervously. The Round Table was not a small guild, but it was infinitely small compared to the stars before them. What's going on? I don't know. I want to go home. I can't even breathe. Among the rankers of the Round Table, the only one who seemed fine was Merlin. The people they were waiting for were two. They were the pillars holding up the current Olympus, Zeus and Hades. And so, dozens of stars waited for those two. Got it. Then I'll hang up. Click, Vishnu muttered after hanging up the phone call he had just received from Varuna. I wonder if he's up to something useless again. Why, what's going on? From the side, Son Goku suddenly stuck his head out. As if he was bored, Son Goku couldn't sit still in one place and kept circling the Round Table. Can't you stay still? You're so restless. It'll be a while before everyone gathers anyway. That's true, but I'm bored to death. If you have a complaint, fight me. I'll pass on that. Vishnu let out a long sigh. There was no one in this tower who could handle this reckless Son Goku. That is, unless Odin, who had died, came back to life. Well, it's a good thing it happened anyway, because it was creepy. There was no way he could actually fight Son Goku in this cramped conference room, so Vishnu opened his mouth, thinking he would appease Son Goku's boredom a little. You know Kim You-won. Kim, Son Goku's eyes shook. Soon, he leaned his face close to Vishnu's and shouted. You finally remembered. A voice that seemed to crawl into a mouse hole. At that moment, You-won's warning came to Son Goku's mind. Just in case, don't go around blabbering that you remember me. Why not? It's just better to leave things as they are now. You'll remember again someday anyway. Aren't you sad? It means that only the three of us here know you. It doesn't matter. It's not like you'll be forgotten forever anyway. What if I go around blabbering? We're done. Son Goku's bright smile distorted. Vishnu looked at Son Goku with strange eyes as his lips pouted and his face filled with disappointment. Soon, Son Goku turned his body after glancing at Vishnu. I'm hungry. Hey, Heracles, do you have anything to eat? I see. Son Goku was taken aback by Vishnu's confident words. Son Goku awkwardly raised the corners of his mouth and whistled as he looked back at Vishnu. What about me? Swish, wheeze, an unnatural whistling sound flowed out. It must have been the most natural performance he could do, but well. Rather, the whistle was like an advertisement saying, I'm suspicious right now. Sneakily. Strange. What's he hiding? The gazes of those gathered in the conference room, whether they were close to Sun Ogong or not, were focused on him. Who was Sun Ogong? He was one of the heroes who fought against the heavens, defeated the Jade Emperor, and earned the title of Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, and had made great contributions in the war against the outer gods. A secret that such a Sun Ogong was hiding. It was bound to be of interest. And one person who had been listening to the conversation. That stupid monkey, Heracles quietly muttered the best curse he could while bandaging his head. And the next moment, it's noisy. Cold water was poured into the conference room, which had been made chaotic by Sun Ogong. Slurp, the sound of two unusually large footsteps entered the conference room. Even Sun Ogong, who was whistling. Even Heracles, who had been cursing at such Sun Ogong. Even Vishnu, who had been recalling the name Kim You-won in his head. Everyone's gaze turned to the two people. You're finally here. 10 years, your face has become brighter in the meantime. The rankers gathered here were all high-ranking high rankers selected by the tower. Those who had experienced the war against the outer gods and survived that war. The de facto rulers of the tower, who had continued to maintain their rankings since then. Nevertheless, the beings before them were dazzling. The owner of the throne who had succeeded Odin and surpassed Vishnu, the Lord of Deva, to reach rank 1. The king of Olympus, whose guild had become the best in the tower, surpassing Asgard. Zeus and Hades, the two kings who ruled Olympus revealed themselves. It's noisy. Hades stroked his beard and looked around the room. His gaze stopped at Sun Ogong. Other than the Knights of the Round Table, there was no one else standing in the conference room. Is it because of that monkey again? Puck. Veins popped out on Sun Ogong's forehead. What, a dog? Calm down, it's an important place. Who started the fight first? Be quiet. Clack. Sun Ogong's head, which was raising its voice, was crushed by a large palm. Heracles' hand covered Sun Ogong's crumpled face. It's true that you started the commotion first. Go sit down. Oh, shit, no matter how reckless he wasn't so tactless as to continue disrupting the meeting. After all, Sun Ogong grumbled and headed to his seat. Heracles, who had calmed down Sun Ogong, who had caused a commotion in one breath, looked at Zeus. Let's get started. Zeus, whose eyes met his, nodded. Father. 5 days passed. Varuna returned to the first floor. He had been back for quite some time. However, he could not go straight to U1. Varuna, who was sitting in the cafe with his legs shaking, could not overcome his anxiety and ended up biting his nails. Why did I come back? I've been sitting in a cafe all day, what am I doing? I came back for now, but I don't know what to say to U1. I was also worried that if I said something, I might just get killed. Thanks to that, Varuna was sitting in a cafe and sulking like this. Excuse me, customer. Varuna turned his head at the voice calling him. The cafe owner, her hair tied back neatly, asked with an awkward smile. Is there anything else you need? Varuna looked around. The cafe was full. No, it had been full for a long time. I'm sure I came in around dawn, but it was already sunset outside. It was a popular place. I've been shaking my legs all day in this crowded cafe, ordering only 1 cup of coffee. Varuna, feeling embarrassed, hurriedly cleared his throat and opened his mouth. Ahem, can I have another cup of coffee? And a slice of strawberry cake. A cup of coffee, strawberry cake okay. Oh, and Varuna Nim. Do you know me? Of course. If a player doesn't know Varuna Nim, they're a spy. Would you mind giving me an autograph if it's not too much trouble? Haha, of course. I'm sorry for taking up your seat, but thanks to you, I feel much lighter. Varuna gave the cafe owner an autograph with a cheerful laugh. Varuna, who soon received a thank you, turned his head and looked out the window. Yeah, that's right. He pretended not to know him and asked slyly, but he actually knew. The fact that most of the people in this cafe were looking at him. At my level, it's obvious that everyone would know. Varuna was like a celebrity on this floor. A handsome face. Polite speech. Thescalevelophonia of Deva's executives. Since he had even done a pictorial and was high in the rankings, it was natural that he would receive attention. However, Kim Yu-won, he was different. At that level, there shouldn't be anyone who doesn't know him. During his prime, Yu-won had risen to 4th place in the rankings. He was even a hero who had predicted the tower's last war and fought against the outer, the foolish chaos, early on, preventing the tower from falling into chaos. Just looking at his achievements, he was practically a higher authority than Zeus, the de facto ruler of the tower. Although he didn't show himself in the last war for some reason. Wait a minute, that person. At some point, he was surprised at himself for thinking highly of Yu-won and muttered. I thought I heard something loud outside. Swish. A fearsome face naturally sat down across from Varuna. Was that gloomy energy you? Kim? Varuna's eyes widened. Soon, he took a deep breath to maintain his composure as much as possible. It's okay for now. This is a cafe, Yu-won said clearly. He said he wouldn't leave Varuna alone if he approached Pandora again. But this was a cafe in the city. There was no need to be afraid for no reason when he hadn't done anything wrong. What's going on in the cafe? What is that tone? A tone that was neither polite nor informal. Yu-won looked between Varuna's cold coffee cup and his pale face. Your coffee and cake are here. The menu came out just in time. The cafe owner who brought the coffee and cake greeted Varuna. Then, her gaze briefly lingered on Yu-won before turning away. It was a gaze examining who Yu-won was with Varuna. And along with that gaze from the cafe owner. Ah. Yu-won realized one thing when he saw Varuna's expression in front of him. The gazes of the cafe owner and Varuna looking at him were completely different. I guess you remembered. Click, Yu-won asked, picking up Varuna's newly ordered coffee. Who I am. Chapter 529. Inside the bustling cafe, Varuna's vision narrowed. His field of view and hearing became limited. Varuna couldn't decide whether to acknowledge that he remembered Yu-won or not. He had been sitting and thinking since morning. Why don't others remember Kim Yu-won? Did he erase himself? Or am I hallucinating, like a memory manipulation? Yeah, that's more likely. What the hell are the odds? I checked everything just in case. Is it a skill or not? With his head in a jumble, Varuna felt a sudden urge to tear at his own hair. But it was only for a moment. He opened his mouth, certain that he couldn't deceive the person in front of him and that he wouldn't have come back here if he wanted to play dumb. Yes, a concise answer. Whoosh. With that answer, a barrier of mana spread around Yuan and Varuna. It was a barrier that was invisible but clearly present. Judging by the faint amount of mana, it would be difficult even for high-ranking players to notice its existence. He was able to block out sound with this much mana. Even Varuna, a high ranker, would have had difficulty noticing its existence if he hadn't been inside it. Right after he was impressed by Yuan's technique of blocking sound with that amount of mana. I was reckless. Varuna apologized to Yuan with a nod. He didn't bow his head too much. This was a public place, and judging by the fact that he had blocked out the sound, he probably didn't want to attract unnecessary attention. You're observant. Yuan, who had put his coffee down again, crossed his arms and looked at Varuna. He had returned to the first floor, but Varuna didn't come to look for Pandora. Instead, he was sitting in a cafe on the first floor. Judging by his expression, it seemed like his memories of him had mostly returned. He has business with me. If his memories had returned, he would have found it strange. Kim Yuan, rank 4. He had been registered in the rankings since before he was the first to reach the 100th floor in the tower and had discovered the conditions for obtaining divinity. There was no one in this tower who didn't know Yuan. What was reckless? That Kim Yuan, I didn't know you, and I dared to. Unable to say that he had been chasing after Yuan's wife, Varuna trailed off and bowed his head deeply. No matter how much he was a womanizer, his life was the most important thing. It's fine that you didn't know. There must have been circumstances. Yes, thank you, so pretend you don't know for now. Excuse me, don't go around blabbing about it. For the time being. Varuna's eyes widened at Yuan's words. His eyes, looking at Yuan sitting across from him, were filled with awe. Was it intentional? Everyone in the tower had forgotten about Yuan. They said that true masters go into seclusion and hide their traces, but Yuan had erased not only his traces but also people's memories for a quiet honeymoon. It was a truly amazing ability. This is a chance. Yuan's face and name were remembered by only himself and Pandora in this tower. From now on, I'm going to make a great impression on my big brother. Before he knew it, Varuna's mind had turned Yuan and his relationship into that of an older and younger brother. If he could build a relationship with Yuan little by little, ahead of others, from now on. If he became brothers with the greatest in this tower, who stood shoulder to shoulder with Vishnu, what could be more secure? If that happened, it would be natural for his position within Diva to rise. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know how long it will take. There were many opinions that were strange about that point. Moreover, Yuan had clearly said, for the time being. That meant that, at some point in the future, he would reveal his existence on this floor again. Life is meant to be lived. Varuna, who had been thinking about carrying Kim Yuan on his back and becoming Diva's real power, couldn't hide his excitement, unlike before. If you say, for the time being, how long might that be? Yuan's eyes narrowed at Varuna's sparkling gaze. What was that burdensome gaze? Just a moment ago, he had looked anxious and scared, but now he had a face that seemed to be looking forward to something. Until I give you permission. I understand. You can count on me. Yuan sighed at the sight of Varuna thumping his chest. He used to be cautious, but not anymore. Don't overdo it. Yes. Varuna grinned and began to eat the cake that came with his coffee. Yuan looked at Varuna as if he were a different species. He knew that he was a cheerful and friendly person, but he didn't know that his attitude would change so suddenly. But why not now? Varuna's question was natural. In fact, Yuan had no intention of keeping it a secret until recently. Because there's a meeting. Me, not you. The large guilds are meeting at the round table. How did you know? I have my ways. Varuna stopped himself from asking any more questions when he realized that he wasn't going to tell him. He figured that they were still in the process of getting to know each other. Yes, for some reason, Olympus and Asgard called for a general meeting of all the large guilds. It can't be kept a secret considering the size, but it seems like they're still proceeding with it in secret for now. That's why. That. A question mark floated above Varuna's head. So you're saying it's related to that meeting? Diva still hadn't received any news about the topic of the meeting. Not only Varuna, a Diva high ranker, but even Vishnu, who had attended the meeting in person, didn't know what the topic was. But Yuan, who was right in front of him, knew about it. Probably, there's something that might be. Yu-won thought about something for a moment, then shook his head. Let's hope it's not. It was still just a guess. Until it was confirmed, it was better to keep himself hidden. Thinking that the conversation was over, Yu-won tried to get up from his seat. But then, why, Baruna's gaze wasn't ordinary. His eyes sparkled as if they contained the Milky Way. His gaze slowly followed Yu-won up as he stood up from his seat. By any chance, why, do you have something else to say? Yes, I have a favor to ask. Baruna nodded resolutely. He opened his mouth with eyes that sparkled like stars and a voice that seemed determined. Can I call you Hung Nim? Get lost. After the meeting, Vishnu, who had returned to Diva, had been spending every day busy. A wooden chair and desk. A sheet of paper on top of it. Creak. As he leaned back, the wooden chair creaked unnaturally and bent. This is stuffy. There was too much to think about. If the topic of the meeting was true, it wouldn't be strange for something to happen on the floor right now. Zeus, who had brought the news, had been brief and clear. The administrator has started to move. Administrator. They were absolutes who existed on each floor, with power and authority that rivaled the top high rankers. The fact that they had started to move definitely wasn't ordinary. I wonder why they didn't show themselves during the war with the Outers. There were many opinions that were strange about that point. Why didn't they, who pursued the order and safety of the tower more than anyone else, show themselves? Actually, Vishnu tried to meet the administrator to ask about it, but they hadn't shown themselves for 10 years already. However, during that time, I ask you, Zeus's question was like a bomb to the rankers in the conference room. Is the administrator an enemy or an ally? It's only been 10 years. The peace was short. The tower, where the war had ended, had only just entered a period of stability. The quarrels between guilds had disappeared, and the conflicts between races were gradually being resolved. Vishnu couldn't ask for more. He just hoped that the tower would continue like this. However, the administrator started to move, becoming a variable. Should I really meet them? He pondered for several days whether he should meet the administrator in person and talk to them. But sitting still like this wouldn't change anything. Yama, swish. As soon as Vishnu opened his mouth, a man with dark skin appeared from the shadows beneath the desk. His face was blurry and couldn't be seen properly. He had long black hair that reached his waist, and he rarely showed himself outside like this, living in the darkness. Yama, one of the Diva's high rankers, a high ranker with a ranking in the double digits. He was Vishnu's closest aide and his escort. Prepare to leave by tomorrow. Tomorrow, you say? There's no point in delaying it. Find the administrator of this floor. I'll go and see them myself. I understand. The administrator's whereabouts were vague, but if he set his mind to it, there was nothing he couldn't find. After all, if he followed the errand boys, he would eventually reach the administrator. And, yes, Yama waited for Vishnu's next words, which trailed off. For a moment, no, it's nothing, quote. Vishnu changed his words awkwardly. Vishnu seemed like he had something to say. He was curious, but Yama didn't ask what he was going to say. He figured that if he didn't say it, there was a reason. Kim Yu-won. What Vishnu was going to ask was if he knew Kim Yu-won. But on the other hand, he wondered if Yama would know a name that he didn't. The heavenly great sage definitely seemed to know. The way Sun Wukong had whistled awkwardly. Anyone who wasn't an idiot would have noticed. Moreover, Vishnu found one more person who reacted differently from the others. Heracles also seemed to know. Maybe it wasn't something to worry about. He looked through the rankings, but the name Kim Yu-won didn't appear among the high rankers, or even among the upper rankers. But, why am I so concerned? It wasn't simply because he was an acquaintance of Sun Wukong and Heracles. In the first place, Vishnu wasn't the type to be interested in others. Kim Yu-won, no matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't remember the name or face. But why? It was a hollow feeling, like a big thorn was stuck in his throat and wouldn't come out. As he repeated the same name over and over in his head. This is a list of the survivors and the dead on the day of reconciliation. After the war was over. While organizing the past battle with the Outers, Surya had brought some news. A record of that day's battle against Shub-Niggurath. That's right. As he recalled the record, Vishnu was finally able to recall the clue to the name, Kim Yu-won. He was there. Chapter 530. Here is a list of the survivors and the deceased from the Day of Concord. Diva was the oldest guild in this tower along with Asgard. They valued records. In particular, Surya recorded every event that happened in this tower, no matter how trivial, in preparation for a future day. That day was no different. Surya recorded not only the fight with Shubnigar F, but also all the events that were thought to be related to the outer. How much damage each guild suffered. What rewards should be given to the rankers who distinguished themselves in the war. How to handle the aftermath of their members who had been sacrificed within Diva. As he checked the list, Vishnu asked, "In what order is this arranged?" "I believe I arranged both the survivors and the deceased in order of their contributions." Contributions. At first, he was definitely puzzled. If it was really in order of contributions, the first name should have been Zeus or Odin, or maybe even himself. However, this is the first time I've seen this name. At the top of the record was a name he had never seen before in his life, Kim Yu-won. Normally, he should have felt something strange at that time. If he had felt something strange, he should have investigated who Kim Yu-won was and found him. But Vishnu didn't do that. No, it wasn't just Vishnu. Surya too, me too, everyone else did. Thinking about it, it wasn't just that time that he had discovered the name Kim Yu-won. He had seen the name Kim Yu-won countless times in various records related to the outer. But every time, everyone had refrained from finding out who Kim Yu-won was. Thinking about it now, their actions were unnaturally artificial. What the hell? His head started to spin. He wondered not only why he hadn't felt anything strange at the time, but also why that situation had come to mind now. So, who the hell is Kim Yu-won? Guild 12 Gods. A small guild consisting of 12 rankers and 100 players. The guild master of that guild, Branel, was sitting in a mansion on the 15th floor, receiving a guest. What business does an errand boy have here? A little boy sitting across from him at the long table. An errand boy. As the hands and feet of the administrators, they handled their work on their behalf. Originally, they were in charge of planning trials or managing important facilities in the tower. Branel had never heard of an errand boy directly visiting a ranker like this. "Is there a place I'm not allowed to go? It's just that it's never happened before. I'm sorry for coming without notice. Oh, this tea is very delicious. Can I get some to go on my way?" The childish creature spoke like an old man. Branel tensed up at the errand boy's smiling face. The errand boy in front of him was at least a branch manager of an organization under the administrator. In other words, it meant that he was comparable to a high-ranking ranker. Did we do something wrong? 12 Gods was a small guild. Even if there was something wrong with the way they ran their guild, it wasn't something that a high-ranking errand boy like the one in front of him would come out for. If they did move, it would be one or two low-ranking errand boys. Furthermore, clatter. The errand boy in front of him had been slowly sipping his tea for the past 30 minutes without saying anything. The chief examiner of the 15th floor, Nabasan. "I'm a little late with my introduction. Most errand boys didn't have names. An errand boy with a name meant that he was a very small number of errand boys who had been chosen by the administrator. Nabasan. It was unusual to call him by a human name. It wasn't unexpected. It wasn't surprising. Fear consumed his body, and he couldn't even think straight. The names of several known errand runners were also unique, like Nabasan's, who was right before his eyes. "I don't need an introduction. You seem to know everything anyway." "Yes, you're the leader of the 12 Gods, the proud ranker of the Dragon Clan. Aren't you Branel? I don't know what to do when an errand runner with a name like that speaks to me like that. Anyway, let's say we've introduced each other. Now, let's talk about business." He was anxious. The very existence of Nabasan, the errand runner before his eyes. Branel trembled with a constant sense of anxiety, though he hadn't caused any major problems. The 12 Gods may not have been that great of a guild, but Branel was a ranker who had led a guild. All those who had conquered up to the 100th floor of the tower had something special about them. And what had brought Branel to where he was now was his ability to sense crises. It's dangerous. It had taken only about 30 minutes for his unexplainable anxiety to turn into certainty. Nabasan had already ignored him twice when he asked him to talk about business. He just drank his tea in silence. He looked out the window and talked nonsense, like how the weather was nice. Thud. Just like that, the moment Branel, who had been suffocating from anxiety, got up from his seat. "Sit down." Creak. Someone walked to the door of the room where the two of them were. "He's here. He's here." Branel's pupils narrowed vertically. He didn't even like Nabasan, who was right before his eyes, so he couldn't help but get angry that someone else had trespassed on his space without permission. "This is the 12 Gods Guild house. No matter how much of an errand runner you are, how dare you come into my area? How dare you?" Boom. The building felt like it was collapsing under the pressure. You think this is your area? Creak, crackle, the tightly shut door crumpled. It wasn't just a simple crumple. The door, which had been crumpled into a single point, soon disappeared completely, to the point where it was invisible. A large figure that had to squeeze through the door. Looking up at the figure, Branell finally realized what the anxiety he had been feeling was. This world is mine. What? Branell barely managed to continue speaking with his trembling lips. Administrator. An irregular flow of magic power flowed from the figure's body. A presence that felt like the whole world had been created from one person. The administrator of the 15th floor appeared before Branell's eyes. He's big. Branell looked up at the administrator before him. Big didn't just mean his size. In terms of size alone, he wasn't even as big as a giant. Branell had met many giants as he climbed the tower, so a size like this wasn't surprising to him. Nevertheless, am I small? Branell couldn't shake off the feeling that he was nothing more than a tiny speck of dust compared to the administrator before him. Rumble, thud, Branell fell to his knees, crushed by the magic power flowing from the administrator's body. Thump, thump, the administrator approached. The errand runner named Nabison knelt down and bowed his head to him. Many errand runners fluttered around the administrator like fairies. You're too scared. We can't have a conversation like this. The administrator clicked his tongue. Branell was half out of his mind from the majesty flowing from the administrator's body. Well, the administrator had intended that from the beginning, so he wasn't too dissatisfied with the current situation. Get a hold of yourself. Branell. Oh, okay, gulp. Branell hurriedly poured himself some tea, mumbling. He was out of his mind. Fear consumed his body, and he couldn't even think straight. For now, he just wanted to do his best to match the administrator's mood. Here, take it, Branell. The administrator's voice calmly sank down. Benevolent and tranquil, it was a resonance that seemed to melt his brain. Yes, yes. Along with his awkward reply, Branell received the teacup he handed over and asked. Won't you come to us? Olympus. Inside the castle located on the Great Mountain, one person was sitting on the throne with his chin propped up. Creak. Wearing golden armor, Zeus muttered something. A variable. Knock, knock. As he muttered while tapping his fingers on the armrest of his throne, the door to the hall opened. You still have a habit of talking to yourself. Creak. As the heavy iron door opened, Hades walked in from outside. Are you that worried? You've arrived, brother. Yes. Zeus nodded his head towards Hades, who came with a load on his back. The two were brothers, after all. Even though it might be different during official ceremonies, Zeus used honorifics towards Hades in private. Are you still worried? Yes. Well, it's not something ordinary. You even called a meeting of the large guilds because of it. The last time all the large guilds gathered in one place was during the war 10 years ago. The Day of Unity, and the war against the outer beings that started when the wall collapsed. Both incidents were times when the tower faced an unprecedented crisis. And this incident, in Zeus's opinion, was just as serious. However, I think it's too early to judge. What's wrong with the administrator starting to move? The administrator moves for the tower. Their purpose is different from ours from the start. Was it because they had already experienced a major incident once? The reactions to the administrator's actions were mixed. It's not easy to perceive the administrator as an enemy. No matter what you say, fighting them is no different from repeating the battle from 10 years ago. Do you believe them? About a month before the meeting was called, the administrator of the floor where Olympus was located visited Zeus. What is it? The administrator had personally visited Olympus. He was waiting for Zeus, sitting on the throne of the hall, the heart of Olympus, where only the master of Olympus could sit. Don't trust us. Us? Are you talking about the administrators? Yes. Zeus had maintained a fairly close relationship with the administrator since long ago. No matter what anyone said, the administrator was practically the true master ruling this tower, and at that time, the relationship with the administrator directly influenced the guild's power. However, the administrator doesn't move for the tower. They only move for our sake. The words of the administrator who visited that day completely changed the perception of the administrator that Zeus had had until now. What do you mean? I'll only say this much. It's burdensome for me to say any more than this. He couldn't hold him any longer. The administrator disappeared from his seat with those words. They were confusing words. There was no basis for it. Nevertheless, Zeus couldn't easily forget the words of the administrator from that day. That was a warning. Zeus was convinced. How dare they, so ridiculously and stupidly. Crackle, crackle, electricity leaking out from the gaps in his armor. Hades shook his head as he watched Zeus, who was smiling with ridicule. Looking at that expression, he seemed to know for sure. They bared their teeth at us. Zeus had already started the fight. Chapter 531. The bright sunlight streamed in through the window. It was noon, the sun high in the sky. Pandora blinked as she looked at her reflection in the mirror. With her face half hidden by a mask and dressed in a white dress, she checked her appearance in front of the mirror. She had simply tied up her hair and changed her clothes, but her beauty shone through. She was known as one of the top 3 beauties in the tower. As Aphrodite, who was known to be of a similar level, had half of her ranking due to her appearance, even those who did not know Pandora could not help but fall for her appearance. It was natural that she would attract attention if she went out into the crowded city. Moreover, Pandora did not want to take on such a bothersome task. "Are you ready?" Yuan opened the door and entered, wearing slacks and an outer coat. Pandora nodded and approached Yuan. The two of them mostly lived their lives at home. It was partly because Pandora stood out too much, but she had not been prepared to live among people until now. "Yep, are you okay?" "Stop." Pandora's movements stopped for a moment at Yuan's question. Going outside where people would swarm her was something she had been thinking about for a long time. No one finds anything easy at first. That was the case even for Pandora, a double-digit high ranker. If only she could fight monsters instead. People in the world were more difficult opponents for her. Yep, a smaller response than before. Her shoulders were trembling slightly, but Yuan made no effort to stop her. He couldn't keep her in this small house forever. "Let's go then." Yuan and Pandora walked out together. Her steps were slow as if she was still trembling. Thanks to that, Yuan walked leisurely, glancing at Pandora, who was walking beside him, holding onto his sleeve. Her face was half covered by a mask, but one could tell that she had taken great care in her appearance by looking at her eyes or the cheek that was slightly exposed. Although her makeup was a bit clumsy. "Is this the first time I've seen her dressed up like this?" Come to think of it, this had never happened before. Pandora had never dressed up properly or worn makeup. At least not in the past 10 years. "She's pretty." In the meantime, Yuan looked at the mask Pandora was wearing. It was understandable that she wore it because she was uncomfortable with people's attention, but it must have been stuffy. "Are you uncomfortable?" "Yep. Do you want to take it off?" After a moment of contemplation, Pandora shook her head. "No, it's okay, really." Yuan stared at Pandora's face for a moment and reached into his inventory. He took out an identical mask and covered his face with it. "This is more fair. No one recognizes you anyway, Yuan. I'm not doing this for other people anyway." "Then, for your sake." Pandora, who had been glancing at Yuan wearing a black mask, opened her mouth. "You look like a villain." Her voice sounded somewhat amused. She didn't laugh much on ordinary days, so it seemed that she was in a good mood because she was going outside. Yuan and Pandora went out into the city. All the while, Yuan kept glancing at Pandora's eyes. What on earth was so fascinating? "She's glowing." There was nothing particularly unusual about the places that Pandora's gaze, which was darting around like a child's, was directed at. Nevertheless, Pandora's eyes sparkled as if she were a child who had come to an amusement park for the first time. Yuan, 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 Yuan. Despite being a high ranker, his alias wasn't all that great. Frantically calling out to him was Pandora. "Look at that." Pandora raised her voice. When he looked in the direction she was pointing, one of the residents was buying cotton candy for his daughter. "There's a cloud on a stick." "Cotton candy is?" Yuan asked with a hunch. "Is this your first time seeing cotton candy?" "That's cotton candy." It turned out that she really didn't know. Cotton candy. It was a common snack not only on Earth, where Yuan was from, but also in the tower. Pandora, who had found a small cloud like cotton candy about the size of her face, showed quite a bit of interest, just like a little child. "Wait a second." Yuan bought the biggest cotton candy he could find on the street. Pandora's eyes sparkled even brighter as Yuan got closer. "Here, try it." Yuan blocked her view with his body so that Pandora could take off her mask. Thanks to the difference in their heights, she was able to take off her mask and admire the fluffy pink cotton candy. Wow! At first, Pandora hesitated on how to eat it, but soon she pinched off a small piece of cotton candy with her fingers and brought it to her mouth. She already loved sweet things. It was only sugar that had been melted down, but Pandora was hooked on the fluffy sweetness of the cotton candy that she had tasted for the first time. After that, Pandora ate several more cotton candies before finally stopping. And after that, Yuan, look, it's a talking monster. That's cosplay. Someone's fighting over there, we should help. It's a performance. Stop it. This is all free, you won. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet. Just a minute, you can't take it home. While they were walking together, Yu-won had to explain everything she didn't know all day long. As soon as she came out of the small house, there was a lot she didn't know. She was new to being active among people. Until now, the only people in her world had been Yu-won, Heracles, and Sun Ogong. No, Zeus was there too. Zeus, the one who had given Pandora the box containing Azathoth's memories and had kept her imprisoned in the underground prison of Olympus for a long time. Because of his actions, Pandora had lived without knowing things that normal people would have taken for granted. I'll have to hit him next time I see him. As Yu-won thought about the day when he would eventually meet Zeus. Yu-won, Yu-won. Thwack, Pandora grabbed Yu-won by the sleeve. Look, what? Yu-won's gaze followed Pandora's nod. In the midst of the bustling crowd, people were gathered around, placing bets. It's not every day you get to see this. A match with a high ranker who visited the first floor. Anyone, players and residents, is welcome. Everyone, come and experience the thrill. A middle-aged man with a large hat and a cane in his hand was making a spiel. And players and residents alike were reaching out to the man, hoping to participate in the game. Yu-won watched the scene and asked, "Does it look fun?" "That's not it." Then, Yu-won tilted his head at Pandora's lack of response. Then suddenly, Yu-won nodded his head when he realized what Pandora wanted. "You said you were good at waiting." "Yup, then stay here and wait for me for a bit." Swish, Yu-won stroked Pandora's head once and walked over to the man who was soliciting customers. "I'll be right back." The world called rankers who were in the top 10% of the rankings, high rankers. Among rankers, they were special. It meant that their influence, abilities, and achievements had been recognized. In that respect, Sierk was hanging on by a thread as a high ranker. His abilities were illusions, deception, intrigue, falsehood. Most of his abilities were specialized in deceiving and confusing the opponent rather than in combat. I underestimated Asgard. Despite being a high-ranking player, his alias wasn't very impressive. Con artist Sierk. It was a humiliating alias rather than an honorable one. Nevertheless, Sierk wasn't very ashamed of his name. He only regretted wasting his money, which he had earned by scamming Asgardians. It's good though. Swish, swish. Sierk quickly mixed the 10 overturned cups and savored the messages entering his mind. 100 points acquired. 100 points acquired. 100 points. It's easy to build up capital thanks to these foolish people. 100 points per challenge. Sierk smirked inwardly, looking at the foolish customers who were blinded by the products and participated in the challenge. To the players downstairs, the name, ranker, was like sweet honey. To them, rankers were the objects of admiration, no different from mentors. However, for Sierk, who was among the top rankers, swindling people and extorting money was as easy as breathing. I'll just stick around here and collect about 1 million points before leaving. Gulp, as Sierk was mixing the cups and calculating the date in his mind. Do I have to guess where the marble is? A black-haired man approached Sierk and asked. Here comes another one. Although the man's tone was a bit irritating, Sierk ignored it. If he had shown this much emotion, he wouldn't have earned the alias of a con artist in the first place. Yes, I'll mix the cups, and you have to find the marble. Sierk covered his face with a mask and smiled pleasantly at the challenger before raising his hand over the table. Now, let's begin. The rules of the game were simple. First, find the marble among the 10 randomly mixed cups. Second, if you find it, you can either receive the first prize or challenge the next game with 11 cups. The prizes get bigger as you complete the challenges. First, let's start with something easy. Swish, sha swish, sha sha swish. Sierk moved his hands. As he quickly mixed the translucent cups, the people watching gasped. Ooh, I can't see his hands. I think I can see them a little. Did you see it? I think it's over there. I saw it completely opposite. You fools, it's in the middle. People's opinions were divided. Some were convinced of the marble's location, pretending to have seen it, while others raised both hands and feet, saying they had no idea. Sierk intentionally made the marble's location visible from time to time, using his hands to continuously induce the next challenger to come out. What's more, the probability is 1 in 10 anyway. The human psyche is simple. On the surface, it may seem like a game of matching the marble's location by following it with your eyes, but in reality, no one present could follow Sierk's hand with their eyes. In that case, there was only one way. A gamble. Just pick one of the 10 cups. Thud. Seoric, who had been mixing the cups quickly, stopped his hands. You know the rules, right? Whiz. Seoric's red eyes looked at the man in front of him. Out of these, choose one cup that you think has the marble. Yuan stared at the cup containing the marble. Among the cups laid out on the wide table, Yuan's gaze was on Seoric's face. You're cheating. Seoric's face was filled with bewilderment. Yuan, with an annoyed expression, stated assertively. There's no marble here. Chapter 532. There's no such thing as a ball here. Sigrid's expression hardened for a moment at Yuan's words. His expression changed in an instant. Even for normal players, let alone most rankers, it was difficult to notice the change. Fraudster Sigrid, he wasn't called that for nothing. What are you trying to say? You need a ball to pick. You can't pick a ball that isn't there. Click. Yuan picked up the cup closest to him. Look. An empty cup. Yuan then moved his hand to another cup next to it. Here too. After the second, the third. Here too. The moment Yuan picked up the fifth cup after the fourth. What are you doing right now? Swish. Sigrid grabbed Yuan's hand. He wanted to twist his wrist right there. But he didn't know what kind of commotion would happen here if he did that. What's more, could this punk be from the bureau? His opponent had seen through his trick. That was right, there was no ball inside this cup, just as Yuan had said. It's not there, is it? When Yuan's question mixed with annoyance flared up. Oh, I guess this fell over here. One of Sigrid's men, who had been soliciting customers nearby, shouted while holding a crimson ball in his hand. Haha, you're making such a mistake. That's not like you, Sir Sigrid. He raised his voice so that everyone could hear him. The crimson ball in his hand caused the audience who had discovered it to stir. What, was there really no ball? When did that fall? Even rankers make mistakes. I find it a little suspicious. Sigrid's eyes narrowed slightly, a very small change in expression that only Yuan, who was nearby, could notice. But unlike his unpleasant feelings, Sigrid had to apologize. It seems I made a mistake. How should I compensate for this? Let's just move on to the next game. Anyway, it's true that you found there was no ball here. Yuan's gaze turned to the man who was calming down the audience. A team of scammers. That guy seems to be pretty skilled too. It's a waste of ranking or skill. It was only the first floor. It was a trivial game, but the 100 points it cost to challenge this game weren't a huge amount of money, but it was definitely not an amount that could be ignored on the first floor. You could easily earn about 1 million points if you worked for just one more month. Of course, that was only if no one got their hands on the item they had put up. Fraudster Sigrid, I've only heard his name, but this is the first time I've actually seen him. He wasn't a very famous ranker. As a ranker who handled illusion-type skills, he was originally specialized in assisting in combat. But at some point, he became blinded by money and started scamming various guilds. Of course, that wasn't a very nice way to put it. How did he end up falling to the bottom like this? Sigrid's intentions were clear. He probably planned to take the money from the players and residents of the first floor and go back up. Is that right? You're saying you'll challenge the next game? Next game. Sigrid took this challenge from Yuan as a provocation. He took out another cup and ball from his inventory and showed it to him. This time, there's one more cup and ball. Naturally, the difficulty will more than double. Grin. Sigrid, who curled the corners of his mouth up, began to mix the cups. The cups moved several times faster than before. Sigrid had decided to deceive Yuan's eyes. This isn't an ordinary bet. Sigrid looked at Yuan with his face covered by a mask and his eyes glowing red. The man before him had figured out his trick. Of course, it was just sleight of hand, but the level was difficult for even high-ranking players. He must have some special skill that enhances vision. It was certain the man facing him actually wasn't a first-floor player. In that case, he had to move accordingly. Clack. Soon, his hand stopped. Now, choose. With a pleasant face, Selleck dropped his hand from the cup. If you guess the right of the marble this time too, you'll be able to take the elixir of immortality made in Diva as the prize. Elixir of immortality, that's what that was. I heard that if you just eat it, you can live forever even if you're not a ranker. People were in an uproar. The elixir of immortality, the second prize Selleck had put up, wasn't actually an elixir that could grant eternal life. To be exact, the effect of the elixir was immortality, not old. However, even with just that effect, the value of the elixir was enormous. My eyes are going to pop out. Even if I succeed just twice, my life will change. However, I will never guess it anyway. Number 1, number 4. Quote exclamation mark quote. Selek's eyes opened wide. This time, everyone could notice the change in his expression. Yu-won ignored Selek's reaction and reached out to lift the first cup. You got one. Soon, he reached for the fourth cup. The other one is. At that moment, Trickster's trick is activated. You can manipulate the memory of the designated target. You can move the designated object. Trickster's trick. The B-rank skill that had made Selek who he was. The rank itself wasn't that high, but the proficiency of the skill was close to 100%. Using the skill was as easy as moving his limbs. That was why Selek planned to use this skill to turn the situation around. I didn't know I'd use it here. He had to use his skill on the first floor. It can't be helped. The elixir of immortality was an item worth over 100,000 points. It wasn't something he could hand over so easily. An unknown force intervenes. Trickster's trick is cancelled. A question mark appeared in his head. The moment Selek hesitated in confusion, Yu-won opened the second cup. You got it. 2 crimson marbles. Selek's eyes finally rolled back. This is a saw. The mouth that was about to shout, scam, was tightly shut. That was his specialty. If he were to argue right or wrong about scamming here and now, the administration bureau would definitely step up. Above all, this was a situation where he couldn't use force. If he used force against players or residents on the first floor, the tower's sanctions would be imposed on him immediately. Let's move on to the next one. At Yu-won's words, Selek, who had a blank expression for a moment, quickly put on a mask. With a pleasant smile, Selek opened his mouth. Are you really going to challenge it? If you fail, the prize for the second challenge will also disappear. It doesn't matter. I understand. Then this time. Swish. Selek took out one more cup and marble from his inventory and started mixing them again. However, number 5, number 7, number 10. An unknown force intervenes. Trickster's trick is cancelled. The next one too. Number 1, number 3, number 4, number 6. An unknown force intervenes. Trickster's trick is cancelled. And the one after that too. The skill kept failing. Quack. This is bad. It was already the 4th time. There was only one left now. If he failed this last one, there was no future for him. I don't know what ability it is, but that kid has the ability to nullify my skill. His eyes are following my hand too. Selek glared at Yu-won, clenching his fists behind his back. Do I have no choice but to run away? Creating an illusion of the trickster. Duplicating the environment within the designated space. Wung. A translucent colored mana spread around Zurich. A swindler's mirage. A skill that creates a semi-solid figure and deceives the eyes of others. After activating the skill, Zurich immediately tried to pack up the items and escape. However, hold it right there. Swish. A hand that suddenly extended out grabbed Zurich's wrist and blocked the skill's activation. Are you crossing the line? Water Spirit intervenes in Swindler's Mirage. Swindler's Mirage is dispelled. Whoosh. The translucent mana disappeared, and the surrounding scenery momentarily distorted. In the eyes of the audience, the sight of Zurich calmly taking out the next cup disappeared, and his true appearance, held by a handsome man, was revealed. What the? Did I just see that? Who is that person? Where did he suddenly come from? That's Varuna, an exclamation from an audience member who recognized the man. It would be strange not to know his handsome face that seemed to glow on its own. I heard he came down to the first floor. Why did he show up here? Is Varuna interested in that item too? It's an item that even a high ranker would covet, but this situation is a bit. Varuna glared at Zurich with piercing eyes. Naturally, Zurich, who couldn't possibly not know his face, looked embarrassed. His expression didn't change much, but he was screaming inside. Why is a high ranker from Diva here? He couldn't immediately understand why a high ranker of that level had come down to the first floor. However, on the other hand, he began to understand the situation. Varuna was behind it. No matter how skilled Zurich was, there were limits to who he could deceive with illusions. Although Varuna was more well-known than other high rankers because of his handsome appearance, he was a ranker who had the skills to be appointed as an executive of Diva. Then it wouldn't be difficult for him to disrupt his skill. It's okay. It's still okay. His skill left no evidence. Even though Varuna was behind him, the game wasn't over yet. There seems to be a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? What kind of misunderstanding? Can we talk about this after you let go of me? Lord Varuna, it hurts a little. Zurich shook his arm as if he were really in pain and broke out in a cold sweat. To the ignorant audience members, it would only seem like a high ranker from Diva had suddenly interfered and was disrupting the game that was going well. Your acting is amazing. Varuna gritted his teeth and had no choice but to let go of Zarek's wrist. His original intention was to help out in a difficult situation and gain a little more of Yuwon's favor. This is just going to be a mess. Varuna glanced at Yuwon next to him and made a puzzled expression. Yuwon wasn't looking at him, who had barged in, but at a completely different place. Wow, this is a fun game. And then, but the guy who's been mixing the drinks has been really bad so far. Can't someone else mix them? Who is it this time? The moment he turned his head, thinking it was another intruder. Thud, a tall man with long, snow-white hair bumped heads with Zarek. Don't you know me? A voice mixed with a giggle. Whoosh, Sun Ogong's two eyes burned brightly, mirroring the terrified expression on Zarek's face. Really? Chapter 533. At that moment when their eyes met. In all the millennia he'd lived as a ranker, Siyal had never felt such terror. No, it was far beyond the realm of terror. There was no ranker who hadn't experienced a life-threatening crisis. Nevertheless, thud, without realizing it, Siyal fell backward in front of the massive audience. The eyes hidden beneath the long, white hair continued to stare down at Siyal. Swish, Sun Ogong's finger covered his lips. At the gesture telling him to be quiet, Siyal clamped his mouth shut. The poker face he'd maintained until Varuna appeared had long since crumbled. Why is the heavenly great sage here? Why is the heavenly great sage? Why is the heavenly great sage here? He repeated the same thought countless times. No matter how much he racked his brain, he couldn't understand. In this vast tower with 100 floors, the probability of meeting the heavenly great sage, who traveled the tower alone. And what were the chances that the heavenly great sage would appear with Varuna? Hey, yes, why yes, the startled Siyal answered. He couldn't help but cower. Sun Ogong was active as a mercenary for Olympus, but strictly speaking, he didn't belong to any guild. Above all, he was known to be a man of extremes who could overturn not only a single ranker but also the heavens themselves if things went south. Tisk, it's a pain in the ass to answer without thinking. Just nod your head. Siyal nodded his head diligently. A thin, long staff was attached to Sun Ogong's belt. The moment that thing moved, the first floor would face another great catastrophe. Good, then hurry up and drop everything you have and get lost. Yes, he opened his mouth without realizing it. He hurriedly closed his mouth again in shock, but it was a statement he couldn't accept. What am I supposed to do if I leave this behind? The 5 items that Siyal had advertised. It was everything Siyal had left. Originally, even fraud required some capital. But Sun Ogong was telling him to leave all that capital behind. Why, you were going to leave it all behind anyway. Siyal shook his head. It was unfair, because he hadn't played the last game yet. Before the game started, Varuna and Sun Ogong had stopped him from trying to run away. It's not unfair, is it? You wouldn't have won even if you'd done it properly. It wasn't wrong. In reality, Siyal had been so unsure of himself in the next game that he'd tried to run away. Above all, the items he had weren't originally his anyway. However, a scammer was the kind of person who felt hard done by if they lost something they had in their hands. And Siyal was no different. If you whine, try doing it properly again here. Don't run away. Sun Ogong grumbled as he disappeared into the crowd. He had vanished from his sight, but if it was Sun Ogong, he was sure to be watching him from somewhere. Just who the hell is this guy? In the end, Siyal turned to Yuwon with tears in his eyes. Is everyone picking on me? Varuna was just as bewildered. Is that really the heavenly great sage? Long white hair and a long staff attached to his belt. There was no mistaking it. It is. As Diva's high ranker, Varuna had participated in the last war with the outer gods. In that battle, Varuna had watched Sun Ogong fight from a distance. At that time, Sun Ogong, who had slaughtered the outer gods in his demonized state, had instilled terror in the rankers who were with him, even though they were on the same side. Oh man, click, unknowingly, I took a step back, and Varuna broke out in a cold sweat. I think I came to the wrong place. Hey, Varuna, startled, looked around. Sun Wukong, who had approached at some point, was standing next to Varuna with a grin. I didn't like the fact that you looked like some kind of parasite, but it was you. His expression was smiling, but it was incredibly gruesome. Varuna asked, sweating all over his body. Are you the main body? Do I look like a clone? A question in return for a question. I couldn't get a sense of it. Right now, I couldn't feel the great divinity of the heavenly great sage, and the rebel of heaven from Sun Wukong in front of my eyes. A clone, If it was a clone, it could be. The commonly known way to distinguish between Sun Wukong's main body and his clone was whether or not he felt his power and divinity. Of course, even if it was a clone, it was difficult for Baruna to look up to him. But why are you here? First floor, the lowest place in the tower. This was a place that even ordinary rankers rarely visited. Baruna himself wouldn't have bothered if it wasn't for Pandora. However, it was a difficult situation to understand that the heavenly great sage would appear on such a first floor. Well, it's obvious. Swoosh. Sun Wukong's gaze turned to Yuan, who had won the game against Siyuk. That alone was enough of an answer. Sun Wukong also remembered Yuan. When was it? Oh, you remember me too, Baruna nodded. Sun Wukong shrugged his shoulders, staring at Baruna like that. I could roughly guess how he came to remember Yuan. Well, it's obvious. You must have been hit while sticking to Pandora. Sun Wukong looked at Baruna with a grin. I don't know about the current Baruna, but before returning to the clockwork, Sun Wukong had fought with Baruna for quite a long time. Naturally, I knew his personality quite well. When did you remember? Probably long before you. Who else is there? Hercules. Now there are 4 of you. 4. Thud. Baruna clenched his fist. It was disappointing that there was another person who remembered Yuan besides him, but the number was not that large. It's okay, not yet. Watching Baruna clenching his fist alone and making up his mind, Sun Wukong shook his head. He's so pathetic. I could clearly see what Baruna was thinking. Among the high rankers representing Diva, the guy who didn't have that much of a position would probably try to rise through Yuan. But well, Sun Wukong smiled wickedly, looking at Baruna dreaming of a rosy future. I can still use it. The spectators dispersed. Since all the items they had were taken away, the game no longer had any meaning. Yuan whispered to Siyuk, who looked absent-minded. Did you aim for the first floor because there is no manager? Siyuk, startled, raised his head. A floor without a manager. With that information, Siyuk came down to the first floor. I thought that as long as I didn't make a big fuss here, there wouldn't be a big problem. Think of it as a blessing. If you had been caught by Olympus doing such a thing on the first floor, you would have lost your neck. Yes, there was no burning heart. Siyuk no longer had any complaints towards Yuan. Instead, he was suspicious of Yuan, including Sun Wukong and Baruna behind him. Thud. Yuan, who had packed the items, approached Pandora first. I could feel the gaze of Sun Wukong and Baruna watching me from the other side. It took you long enough. Swish. Yuan handed Pandora the game items he had obtained, just as he had intended from the beginning. Is this it? A ring was placed on Pandora's finger. A small, thin ring with a red jewel embedded in it. Pandora's eyes lit up as she looked at the ring on her hand. Yeah, Pandora spread her fingers out and examined the ring from all angles. Soon, she smiled pleasantly and lovingly clasped her hands together. I like it. I'm glad. Yuan took Pandora's hand in his. Although the spectators had all left, there were still quite a few people around. He didn't want to make a fuss here. Let's go out again next time. You're leaving already? Yeah, I think I should. Yuan's gaze turned to Sun Wukong and Baruna, who were hiding quietly in a corner. There's an intruder, you see. Yuan snapped his fingers. Varuna flinched from afar, and Sun Wukong chuckled and disappeared from his spot. Varuna followed Yuan from a distance. Soon, as Yuan returned home, Sun Wukong suddenly poked his head in. Were you on a date? Sun Wukong's movements were sometimes unpredictable, even for Yuan. His expression was somewhat excited, as if he had found Yuan's playing with Pandora quite amusing. Can't you tell? What? Why are you so confident? You were just embarrassed. It was like the old days when children used to play, catch me if you can. Yuan sighed and looked back at Varuna, who had followed him. Hey, what? Don't just go out there in the future. Varuna had made things worse by getting involved when he was trying to be foolish. He could have just ignored it if it had been something related to him. Yuan had known for a long time that people were not very interested in things related to him. However, it's annoying when you guys get involved. Sun Wukong seemed to have wisely hidden his appearance a bit. Although his hair was white, his face had changed quite a bit with his skills. However, that was not the case with Varuna. Come in for now. Yuan let Sun Wukong and Varuna into the house. Pandora was too preoccupied looking at the new ring she had gotten. Clank. He roughly handed them 2 glasses of water. You're not just here to hang out, are you? Tell me. Huh, how did you know? Are your eyes the same when you come to hang out as they are now? And if you didn't have anything to say, you wouldn't be sitting here. It wasn't just because he had known them for a long time. It was largely because Sun Wukong was such an easy character to read. Is that so? I guess I need to learn something like that, like Poker Face or something. Stop talking nonsense. What happened when you went out this time? What happened? It's a bit ambiguous. Sun Wukong scratched his head. It was a habit he had when he was trying to think, but it wasn't going well. Like you said, the administrator made a move, but if he made a move, how? I think some administrator came to Zeus and told him not to trust them. Zeus. He was the current rank 1 high ranker. That meant that Zeus was the player who represented the tower. An administrator had warned the representative of the players. However, unlike that symbolic act, the content of the warning was extremely poor. I thought something big was going to happen, like when Shub-Niggurath appeared, but it was nothing. Varuna, who had been listening to the conversation nervously, spoke in a hoarse voice. On the other hand, it's an all-out war. Yuan's reaction was quite extreme. Chapter 534. Unlike Yuan, who had his name erased and then returned, Azazel's name had disappeared completely. Sun Ogong and Varuna shut their mouths. A full-out war. With whom? Another fight? Pandora, who had been looking at the ring, asked, raising her head. 10 years. It hadn't been a very long peace. Moreover, Pandora cherished her current life more than ever. Having been imprisoned in Olympus for over 1,000 years, the past 10 years when she had simply been at home had been the happiest. It's not certain yet. There's no need to think so optimistically. Especially since it's against them. Yuan immediately cut off Varuna. It was a situation where even a casual word of comfort should be avoided. Varuna also realized who the opponent was and asked cautiously. Are you really going to fight the administrator? He could barely bring himself to say it. To fight the administrator was a ridiculous idea. The power that each of them possessed was like a god on each floor. To manage a single world, one had to be a being with that much power. Naturally, to rankers who had lived as players, the name administrator was that great. I have to, whether I like it or not. If they want it. Varuna's expression hardened. On the other hand, Sun Ogong was grinning, revealing his sharp teeth. His eyes gleamed golden as he said, "Is it fun?" "Well, isn't it?" Rumble. Sun Ogong's excitement wouldn't die down, and the magic power flowing out of his body began to shake the entire house. The thought crossed his mind that the house might collapse again, but Yuan didn't stop Sun Ogong. Even to this extent, Sun Ogong was holding back quite well. Can we really fight the administrator? The guy was looking forward to it. Hoping that the warning the administrator had given Zeus was real. The administrator and the errand boys. The fight between rankers and players. The beginning of that great war. That's good. I thought I was going crazy from boredom. Yeah, it's good to be confident. It wasn't an empty compliment. If the usual Sun Ogong was a bumbling, empty-headed thunderclap, the Sun Ogong when he fought was literally a war god. Sun Ogong was the only ranker that Yuan acknowledged as having a better fighting sense than him. But why will it be a full-out war? Is there any basis for it? Unlike Sun Ogong, who absolutely trusted Yuan's words, Varuna was skeptical. A full-out war with the administrator. Just by extrapolating from the words telling them not to trust themselves, it was too big of a story. There's something I know a little about. About the administrator. Yeah, at Yuan's answer, even Sun Ogong's expression turned curious. But how do you know about that? You might know about the outer, but even we don't know much about the administrator. Sun Ogong, who had been blinded by the thought of a hot fight, asked belatedly. The information about the outer had been in his possession since before he returned to Clockwork, but even the future Odin didn't know about the administrator. It's not information I had. Then, the memories of filled square. Quote. Even with Yuan's explanation, Sun Ogong's expression remained the same. No, it seemed like there were more question marks floating above his head. Azazel. It seemed like he neither heard nor understood the four-letter name. Anyway, I think so. There were unnatural reactions. He didn't seem to listen much to Yuan's explanation, and seemed to say that he understood anyway. He didn't expect much. He had already seen the same reaction from Sun Ogong and Heracles. I guess they don't remember. Unlike him, the two didn't remember the name Azazel. Unlike the two, who had lost the name of Azathoth and then regained it, the name of Azathoth had completely disappeared. Perhaps the only one who remembers is. Yuan's gaze turned to Pandora. Unlike the other two, Pandora nodded at Yuan's gaze. Only two people remember Azathoth, Yuan and Pandora. And probably Probably, even the administrators. He had thought so. The moment they realized that Azathoth had disappeared, they would surely move. If they had forgotten the name of Azathoth, like Sun Ogong or Varuna, they would have continued to remain silent. However, now, they had begun to move. They had sent a warning to Zeus, and according to that warning, there would definitely be friction. For now, Yu-1 raised his head. He suddenly felt like he should go back up. There shouldn't be anyone moving carelessly. 95th floor, the highest world among the floors ruled by Deva. Vishnu stepped into the management bureau of that world. It's been a long time since I've been here. Vishnu muttered as he looked at the towering tower and the errand boy guarding the entrance. The management bureau, a castle of their own, operated by errand boys, including the administrator. It feels like it's been 10,000 years. It was when I first became a ranker. Yama was one of the colleagues who climbed the tower with Vishnu. They had come to this management bureau long ago, in the days when there were hardly any rankers. At that time, the existence of the administrator was like heaven to Vishnu. Even in the early days of the tower, the administrator was considered a kind of god, and his power was absolute. Thud, Vishnu and Yama headed towards the entrance of the management bureau. As expected, an errand boy blocked their way. Lord Vishnu and Lord Yama, welcome. You say welcome, but why are you blocking our way? Yama, who was next to Vishnu, glared at the errand boy. He was a fairly high-ranking errand boy, tall enough to reach up to his waist. However, even so, he was not enough to dare to block Vishnu's way. Oh my, it seems I have been rude. I was just trying to guide you. Guide, Yama looked back at Vishnu. Yama's expression hardened as Vishnu nodded with his eyes met. Yama glanced around and spoke to the errand boy. We're here to see the administrator. Follow me. The errand boy turned and headed towards the management bureau. Yama hesitated for a moment, but when Vishnu pushed his back, he sighed and followed him. Thud, thud, the interior of the management bureau, which rose like a tower, was much wider than it looked from the outside. A black ceiling that seemed as high as the sky. A wide corridor that stretched out in front of him. And countless sparkling dots engraved on the walls that spread out to the left and right. It was a space so vast that it was as if another tower existed within the tower. It was a slightly different landscape than when he had visited the management bureau a long time ago. Hey, errand boy, as Yama, who had been following quietly, asked. My name is Blue Hand. What, that's my name. Don't call me, hey, or errand boy, but by my name. The errand boy, Blue Hand, corrected him. His tone of voice was languid, but the look in his eyes as he looked back was sharp. As if he had expected this, Yama sighed. All right, Blue Hand, I'll ask you one thing. What is it? Were there always this many errand boys here? Flicker. The lights around him moved at Yama's words. There were so many that it was creepy. They were hidden in the walls, but their gazes were clearly those of errand boys. How many are there? It seemed like there were tens of thousands at least. The number of errand runners managing the tower was numerous, but it was different to see it with his own two eyes instead of just imagining it. There were this many errand runners on just one floor. The administrator can't be the only problem. Yama's hands started to shake. From the back of his hand to his forearm, his veins started to bulge. Just as black energy started to fill Yama's eyes. Yama, Vishnu's voice calmly soothed him. Thanks to that, Yama was able to keep himself from causing a scene. No matter how high-ranking he was as a high ranker, showing hostility towards this many errand runners wasn't a good idea. In the end, Yama closed his mouth. This isn't a very welcoming atmosphere. Quote. Vishnu followed up. Creak, thud thud thud. Trees started to rise up from all sides. The trees that had sharp thorns showed how Vishnu was feeling. Was it Blue Hand? Yes, Lord Vishnu. Where is the administrator right now? Thud thud thud. The branches and roots of the tree that had risen up started to spread out through the entire administration bureau. The trees had thorns that were sharper than spears. As they spread, the errand runners that had been scattered around like stars started to show themselves one by one. If he's here, he'd better come out quickly. Why are you acting like this all of a sudden? You underestimated me. The corners of Vishnu's lips went up. He's showing his intent to kill so obviously, and you're asking why. Crackle. The trees spread out. Don't play dumb when you never even thought about hiding it in the first place. Vishnu's eyes flashed green. Blue Hand, the errand runner, showed a troubled expression at that menacing magic power. He's reacting faster than I expected. Did I provoke him too much? Vishnu's magic power created trees. It was rumored that if he wanted to, he could cover an entire world with thorny trees. He didn't know about Yama who was behind him, but if Vishnu started to move personally. This is difficult, the number of errand runners didn't matter. If Vishnu started to move, half of the errand runners here would be swept away in one go. Should he stop him now? While Blue Hand was thinking about this, there was rumble rumble. The entire administration bureau shook. Vishnu turned his head at that vibration. He's finally here. The errand runners parted to the left and right. The administrator who appeared through the group of light was a beautiful woman with long hair that reached her ankles. She was one of the greatest beings in the tower who even Vishnu had only seen a few times. She was the administrator of the 95th floor. It seems like my children were rude to you, she said as if she was scolding the other errand runners. At the administrator's appearance, Blue Hand prostrated himself on the floor. No matter how famous an errand runner was, an administrator was like a god to a mere errand runner. On the other hand, Vishnu knew that the administrator in front of him had created this situation. It seems like the administrator is the same. Really? I apologize. The administrator covered her mouth with her hand and gave a faint smile as she stared at Vishnu. Then, can I continue to be rude? Are you going to come out like this? Didn't you come here knowing this? How unexpected. Vishnu closed his eyes for a moment at the administrator's playful expression. He had been hoping it wouldn't come to this. Do I have to fight? The administrator's warning that he had heard through Zeus became reality in front of him. Chapter 535. Thankfully, you're not late. Pale Moon, who was kneeling and prostrating, was relieved inside. The administrator of the 95th floor. Their god had come to this place without being late. In other words, the situation had been reversed. No matter how much it was Vishnu, he wouldn't be able to face the administrator confidently. Moreover, we have a much larger number of people on this side. Vishnu's companion was only Yama. He was also a high ranker who was famous in Diva, but there were tens of thousands of errand boys on this side. It's an easy win. Boong. At that moment, the trees that Vishnu had created, which filled the interior of the administration bureau, began to move at once. Quote exclamation mark quote. Ooh, trees with hundreds of millions of thorns. They swept through the administration bureau. Puaik. The trees became a wave like a ferocious monster and devoured the errand boys at once. The thorns of the trees, which contained Vishnu's magic power, were harder than any steel and sharper than the tips of spears made by craftsmen. Clang, clang, clang. Pale Moon was definitely one of the errand boys with outstanding abilities. He barely managed to block the thorns of the tree while bleeding all over his body. Pook. A thorn protruded from the palm of his hand, which he had stretched out to block the fatal blow, in the opposite direction. If he had reacted even a little more slowly, his body would have been pierced like the other errand boys. What about the others? Flick. Pale Moon, who had barely secured his safety, looked around. It wasn't easy to grasp how much damage had been done if a thorn tree of this size had moved. Soon. This is crazy. The gruesome sight around him caught his eye. Pale Moon was shocked at the sight of the corpses of the errand boys that filled his vision. Most of the errand boys who had been swept away by the thorns had died, soaked in blood. Fortunately, the range of the attack did not reach the entire administration bureau. It was thanks to the administrator. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The trees, which had been crushed by gravity, were replanted in the ground with their thorns broken. The confrontation between the administrator and Vishnu. The administrator glared at Vishnu with fierce eyes. Are you going to act this despicably? I should get rid of the annoying guys first, you know. Your opponent is me, though. Isn't that why it turned out like this? Snap. Vishnu's ear was cut, and blood splattered. In that short moment, the administrator protected the errand boys from Vishnu's attack and counterattacked at the same time. What a delicate attack. I almost had my neck pierced. You wouldn't have died from that, would you? You're joking. You're a little different from the other administrators. What? A little more? Would-da-da. Following Vishnu's gesture. You're out of luck. Kwaak. All the trees on the ground rose up and began to swallow the administrator. Kook-dook. Along with the intense pressure, the administrator's body was crushed inside. Vishnu stretched out his hand and emitted green magic from his fingertips. Kook-dook. A sharp, thorny tree pressed down on the administrator. Crushed, and crushed again. A drop of sweat ran down Vishnu's forehead. As much as magic was poured in, the pressure of the trees surrounding the administrator increased proportionally. And at that moment, Quaduk, the administrator, wrapped in trees, spread his arms and began to break free from the pressure. It's a bit too aggressive for a first reading. Peesht, pick. The administrator, bleeding all over and with his head pierced by thorns, emitted a red glare. Can we move now? Jeek, JJEOK. The perforated body quickly regenerated. The wounds on her body absorbed the surrounding magic and regained their original form in an instant. Soon, the administrator's order was given. Kill them both. And at that moment, the 95th floor's management bureau recognizes you as an enemy. All errand boys recognize you as an enemy. This world judged Vishnu and Yama as enemies. Lord Vishnu. Yama turned his head at the message that rang in his head as well. With his fighting spirit roused, he stood in front of Vishnu. Yama, and to him, you survive. Vishnu gave the order. Yes, the administrator's target is me. She's been expecting me to come from the beginning. Judging from the fact that she had prepared tens of thousands of errand boys in advance, she had known from the beginning that Vishnu would come. That meant one thing: there's a rat among the devas. It meant that information had been leaked in advance. It might not be just Deva. Maybe Olympus or other guilds as well. Pow! In the middle of his speech, Vishnu's shoulder burst open. Blood splattered onto Yama's face. With his black pupils greatly dilated, Yama screamed. Lord Vishnu, calm down, Yama. It was a calm voice that was strangely at odds with the situation. Strangely enough, his excitement that had flared up in an instant subsided at that voice. Calm down, but I don't plan on dying either, Yama. Vishnu's face, which was smiling gently, really didn't look like someone facing a life or death situation. I know I shouldn't fall for that smile. Yama was aware that Vishnu was making that expression in order to reassure him. However, I understand, he couldn't overcome that expression of Vishnu's. He couldn't disobey the order. Because up until now, Yama had never disobeyed Vishnu's orders, not even once. Thud, he turned his body with difficulty, putting strength into his legs. Numerous errand boys and the blue hand blocked Yama's path. Thud, thud, get out of the way. Swoosh, a black tattoo began to appear on Yama's face. If you don't get out of the way, I'll make you get out of the way. Soon, the tattoo covered his entire face. A completely black face, like a mask. It looked like he had drawn something on with a skill, but that was Yama's real face. I'm sorry, but, stab, stab. The blue hand, which had its palm pierced by Vishnu's attack, blocked Yama's path along with the errand boys. We have no choice but to stop you. Yeah, I guess so. Whoosh, a black sickle was created in his hand by Yama's magic power. Yama's sickle, which appeared in both of his hands, was considered a symbol of death along with Hades. And the moment that sickle moved, death sentence. Swish, as the sickles crossed, the necks of the errand boys in Yama's field of vision were cut off and fell to the ground. Then please break through. Thud, Yama, who held two sickles in his hands, leapt forward. He didn't even glance at the magic power of the administrator and Vishnu that he felt behind him. Yama was more worried about Vishnu than anyone, but right now, he had something else he had to do. Following Vishnu's orders, all I had to do was survive here. A commotion occurred on the 95th floor. Coo 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 coo. At first, it was thought to be just an earthquake. Its scope was not that wide either, and only a few players and residents could feel it. However, creak, thud thud, the extent of the disaster grew rapidly. What is that? A tree, kudu. A single tree soared high into the sky. The tree grew rapidly, as if it would devour the world of the 95th floor. Is it Vishnu? Many rankers stayed on the 95th floor. Among them were rankers who had stood on the battlefield with Vishnu, and some had indirectly experienced the power he wielded. Vishnu's power covers the world. The rumor that was considered absurd was now happening on the 95th floor. The myth I wrote is, creator of creation. Gulp. Blood flowed from the severed part of his torn-off arm. But soon, you shouldn't think you've won just because of this. Woo woo, the arm that received the green light regenerated quickly. Creator of creation. It was the myth that Vishnu had used in the tower for a long time, and it was the name that became the origin of his divine status. He had a faster regeneration rate than any other ranker in the tower. You're a tenacious guy. You talk as if you're talking about someone else. The administrator wiped the blood flowing from the corner of his mouth with his hand. He confirmed that he could not inflict proper wounds with each other's mediocre attacks. When looking at only the exterior, neither the administrator nor Vishnu seemed to have any visible wounds. But your insides can't be intact, can they? It's the same for both of us. Really, you're only handsome, but you have no charm. The administrator's hand moved. Mana in the atmosphere seeped into the administrator along with the movement of his hand. Although his wounds were regenerated, Vishnu gradually felt that he was approaching his limit. No matter how much he treated his external wounds, his insides were rotting away. More than anything else, does he have infinite mana? The more he fought, the more Vishnu felt that the administrator in front of him was getting bigger and bigger. Is this the administrator? Mana that was nearly infinite. The beings who ruled this world, even before the players entered. It was as if the tower was on her side. Even so. Peak. Vishnu's gaze turned to the ground. He saw the blue hand that had been split by the sickle and turned into a corpse. Looks like you got away. Even though he was being chased by the errand boys, it was impossible for them to catch Yama unless the administrator followed him in person. Yama's attribute was darkness. He had lived in Vishnu's shadow all his life, so he was a master of stealth. Where are you looking? A voice sounded next to his ear. Suddenly, one side of Vishnu's head exploded. For a moment, his mind was dizzy, but when Vishnu ran his hand over his head, that part quickly regenerated. Swish, kwagwagwak. Thorns extended from the giant tree and flew towards the administrator's body. After that, it was the administrator and Vishnu's fistfight again. Vishnu's regeneration was gradually slowing down. And as if to mock Vishnu, the administrator kept recovering his body and rushing at him. This is difficult. Even for Vishnu, he couldn't regenerate his body indefinitely. On the other hand, looking at the administrator who was becoming more and more energetic as time passed, Vishnu had no choice but to make up his mind. Then, koo-doo-doo-doo, kway-doo-doo, trees sprang up everywhere, centering on Vishnu and the administrator. The trees that sprang up high enough to block the sky in an instant created a forest. The creator of creation, the administrator's eyes narrowed as he looked at the forest that was hostile to him. The creator of creation, the mythology of Vishnu, who wrote a long and great history called Deva. The moment he confirmed its true nature with his own eyes. This makes it more certain. Until now, he had been dealing with them moderately, but the administrator clearly realized it. Tens of thousands of years since the tower was created. During those long years, how high the beings called players had climbed. I can't give you any more time. Swish. As the administrator reached out his hand, a clear handprint appeared on Vishnu's neck. Vishnu's neck and arms twisted under the pressure of his body. Despite the pain that felt like his eyes were being gouged out, Vishnu continued his myth without paying any attention to it. Together let's go. The moment the hand that had fallen and was trembling below clenched. Administrator. The giant forest swallowed Vishnu and the administrator. Chapter 536. The 95th floor was turned upside down. Vishnu's fight, which had occurred for an unknown reason, had turned the previous piece into nothing. About half of the 95th floor was covered in forest. The trees that had sprouted like those in the land of the giants blocked the light from most of the 95th floor. The residents thought about Vishnu's sudden riot. Who on earth was his opponent? And right after the fight was over. Queek, dodging the attack, the administrator of the 95th floor, who had escaped to the management office of the 94th floor, collapsed on the floor, vomiting blood. The administrator of the 94th floor clicked his tongue and shook his head after seeing his appearance. How pathetic. He had the exact same face as the administrator of the 95th floor. Aside from the fact that his hair was silver, the two of them looked so much alike that one could believe they were twins. What did you just say? What is this appearance? Who will you try fighting? I'm barely hanging on like this. You're only on the 94th floor. What? The administrator of the 94th floor glared at the administrator who looked exactly like him, his eyes blazing. The hierarchy of the administrators was divided by floor. From the greatest administrator of the 100th floor to the lowest administrator of the first floor. It could be said that numbers were the standard for dividing their ranks. There's only a one-floor difference. Anyway. Man. With nothing more to say, the administrator of the 94th floor sat down with a huff. Did you get beaten up that badly? By Vishnu. He was amazing. Didn't one of the three get annihilated while fighting Shubnigar F? That's why. She let out a hollow laugh as if she couldn't believe it. Our guess was right. Yeah, we can't waste any more time. He's gotten too strong. In any case, they did stop Nyarlathotep and Yog Sothoth. At this rate, touching the wound that wouldn't regenerate, the administrator muttered. We might get eaten by the hunting dogs. Sacrificing the hound after hunting a rabbit. After a hunt, the dogs that had become useless were boiled and eaten. After the fight with the outer gods was over, Olympus, Deva, and the other large guilds and rankers were reigning over the tower. As expected, they should have lost most of their strength fighting the outer gods, including Azathoth. But what the heck, aside from Odin's warriors, the damage to the large guilds was almost non-existent. It was because of the sudden variable. To think that they could transcend the axis of time. Rankers from a different time had suddenly appeared. Their existence, led by the Odin of the future, was enough to completely overturn the situation. Why on earth did those guys come here? We still haven't found the reason why they interfered here from the world line where they were defeated by Yog-Sothoth. That means, her wound was aggravated because she had gotten too excited and yelled. The wound she had received from Vishnu didn't regenerate easily. No, far from regenerating, the area continued to tear and bleed as if it had been poisoned. It was a mess. She still felt like the fight wasn't over. Calm down and rest for now. What are you going to do with a wound like that? You sound like my younger brother today. That's because you are my younger brother. After saying that, the administrator of the 94th floor left his seat. The management office was large, and many errand boys and girls had gathered. All of them began to pour their magic power into the administrator of the 95th floor's body to help him recover. Vishnu, a god of Deva and a being who had ridden the myth of being the creator of creation. He was the one who had once surpassed Odin and Zeus and had the greatest rank in the tower. Still, he wasn't shabby for the first firecracker. Crack. Yuan looked over his player kit. He hadn't felt good since early morning. Right after hearing that the admin had warned Olympus, I felt uneasy. The moment I checked the trending news on Keat, I thought, this is bad. Too late. Yuan could confirm yesterday's anxiety was true. Head of Deva, disappears from rankings. Who was the opponent? The return of the outer. Some rankers announce a fight with the admins. Prelude to a war, or just a problem between individuals and devas. Did Vishnu really die? Numerous articles flooded in. A Deva disappeared from the rankings. The 95th floor was in ruins. Anyone could guess that Vishnu had fought just by looking at the photos of the battlefield. A world covered in giant trees. It must have been a huge mess. Even if it was Vishnu weakened from his fight with Shubnigar F, he was once the greatest being in the tower. Even for the admins, it wouldn't have been easy to defeat such a Vishnu. Above all, Yama was always by Vishnu's side. That meant, have you prepared the errand boys? I seemed to have a rough idea of what the situation was. Fortunately, Yama seemed to have made it out alive. Errand boys, what are you talking about? Crunch. Varuna asked, spreading jam on his toasted bread and putting it in his mouth. It seemed he hadn't heard the news yet, since he had left his kit somewhere. They said Vishnu died. Vish PFF'd. Saliva flew out along with the bread he was chewing. Yuan quickly grabbed a plate to block Varuna's saliva. What? Who died? Although the saliva was disgusting, I couldn't blame his reaction. Who was Vishnu? He was a great high ranker who had ruled as the head of Deva for over 10,000 years. And Varuna was one of the executives of such a Deva. He couldn't help but be shocked by Vishnu's death. Vishnu. Why did he die? Why? They said he fought with the admins. With the admins? Varuna's face turned white as he recalled yesterday's conversation. The admin's warning to Zeus. And Yuan's judgment that it would lead to an all-out war. Right after that, the news of Vishnu's death was delivered. No way. Varuna quickly took out his kit and checked. There were dozens of missed messages. Varuna searched for the article without having time to check the messages. The news of Vishnu's death was no longer a secret. Deva had entered an emergency, and the admins, errand boys, and devas were all in a state where a fight could break out at any moment. Varuna, who belatedly checked the messages, got up from his seat. I should go. Where? Crunch. Even in this situation, Sun Wukong asked, munching on the toast piled up on one side. To Deva. Bye. Sun Wukong waved his hand as if he wasn't interested. Varuna sighed, looking at Sun Wukong, who was focused on eating. He didn't seem to have any thoughts, even in this critical situation. Well, there's no connection between Cheongwadi-sung and our Deva. Varuna looked at Yuan, Sun Wukong, and Pandora with regretful eyes. Just because they had eaten a few meals together didn't mean they had formed a connection with them. In the first place, it was his own stubbornness that brought him to this place, and there was no reason for them to help him. Of course, that didn't mean it was easy to just leave. Let's go back for now. Thud. Varuna left his seat. No one saw him off as he left the house. Yuan, Sun Wukong, and Pandora all continued eating their meals in silence. After Varuna's presence had completely disappeared. Do you think he's really dead? Sun Wukong was the first to ask the question. It was a difficult question to answer. If it were before, I would have thought he was dead. Why? Because he disappeared from the rankings. The rankings standard was absolute. The Ranking Management Bureau was an organization managed by 100 administrators and over 10 million errand boys, and there was no being who could deceive their eyes. However, the problem is that it's an organization that's run by administrators. Unreliable. Yes, the administrators turned around. Since they had already fought Vishnu, the other guilds wouldn't trust the administrators either. The ranking had now become an unreliable number as an index for determining the ranker's order. Because it could be used as a tactic to raise or lower a ranker's rank, or to erase the ranking. So, are we just going to leave it like this? Snap. Along with the sound of grinding teeth, Sun Ogong's eyes changed. Vishnu was a comrade who had fought together with Wu Yian and Sun Ogong for quite a while in the future. He had even sacrificed himself in the last battle against the foolish chaos, and had ended up catching the bastard. Sun Ogong, who would challenge any strong opponent without discrimination, had fought with Vishnu several times. Hey, wait a minute. How can this end like this? You've lost the moment you became unable to move. Accept your defeat. Wow, man, you're a deadly bastard. Hey, I'll do it again next time. This is already the third time. How about you just accept it? At first, Sun Ogong couldn't match Vishnu. At that time, Vishnu was in a complete state with the souls of Shiva and Brahma, and Sun Ogong was weaker than he was now. A complete defeat. Sun Ogong and Vishnu's track record was dismal. However, look at that, Sun Ogong eventually won. I told you I'd be different this time. The 100th fight. In that fight, Sun Ogong finally succeeded in defeating Vishnu. Even then, Vishnu was known as the greatest high ranker in the tower. Even Odin, the king of Asgard, was no match for Vishnu. The defeat of such a Vishnu was an event worthy of being recorded in history. Surrounded by Diva's high rankers, Sun Ogong was quite hurt and exhausted for a winner. I see, you are different, really, so what are you going to do now? Are you going to cut my throat? No, Sun Ogong reached out to Vishnu that day. Why are you doing this to a friend? Let's play again next time. Puff. He clenched his fist so hard that his fingernails dug into his flesh. Pandora, who felt Sun Ogong's anger, asked, looking at the atmosphere. Are you fighting? Probably. Then you're fighting. Pandora spoke with conviction at Wu Yian's uncertain answer. She realized that the answer, perhaps, was a remark to reassure herself. Clank. Pandora, who put down her teacup, went upstairs. The momentum of her footsteps going up the stairs was full of energy. She had also been preparing for a fight since the news of Vishnu's death. We need to stretch our bodies a little too. Wu Yian spoke first. And at those words, Sun Ogong asked in surprise. Why are you going first? I've been resting for a while. It had been 10 years. It was because he had persistently refused Sun Ogong's request to play. It was natural since he and the guy would inevitably catch the eyes of the rankers and administrators if they had a fun fight, whether they liked it or not. However, it's not the time to care about that anymore. Fortunately, there was a suitable place. There won't be any administrators on the 95th floor right now. Vishnu was dead. Even if he was an administrator, his body couldn't be intact. How about that place? Why not? His lips curled up. Sun Ogong got up from his seat, his eyes sparkling more than ever. I welcome you. Chapter 537. Expectations are the same for Wu Wan. There wasn't much to pack separately. Most of the luggage was in the inventory, and the points used as currency were assigned to the individual anyway. The three of them, who had rented a sun chariot, immediately began to climb up. There was no need to hire a coachman to supply magic power separately. It's cozy, so it's good. Sun Ogong, who was sitting on the edge of the carriage, opened his mouth with his hair fluttering in the wind. Sun Ogong, who had been playing around in the cool wind for a while, returned to Wu Wan and Pandora. I don't know what I'm doing between a couple. When have you ever cared about something like that? That's right. Actually, I just said it. Wu Wan shook his head at Sun Ogong's playful laughter. Whether it was a couple or not, Sun Ogong was not the kind of person who would care about such things in the first place. If he was jealous, he was the kind of guy who would be jealous of Wu Wan and Heracles fighting without him. What is that? It's a gift I gave you this time. Sun Ogong's gaze turned to the ring on Pandora's hand. Even if he didn't know about the item, Sun Ogong's eyes could see through the essence of things. You've got something amazing. It's pretty. It's just shiny. It's pretty. Sun Ogong replied dryly to Pandora's answer. Sun Ogong was not interested in outward beauty. For him, items were just tools to become stronger, and additional value had no meaning. Of course. Still, that bastard Sea Urgic, my stomach hurts a little. He gave away something like his entire fortune. Even excluding that point, the ring on Pandora's hand was quite valuable. Is it an explosive ability based on physical strength? It's an item whose value changes depending on the user's ability, but wouldn't it suit Pandora quite well? Are you still thinking about fighting? Did you just realize that? He still looked very excited. It's been a while since I fought you. For Sun Ogong, fighting was the best game. Knowing that well, Wu Wan didn't bother to calm Sun Ogong down, who was getting more and more excited. I need to start warming up my body from now on. 10 years. Even Wu Wan didn't know how much Sun Ogong had changed during that time. Meanwhile, Yuan had no idea how much Sun Ogong had changed. Pandora, who had now gotten to know Yuan somewhat, shook her head after realizing the meaning behind his gaze. Yuan was just as excited. Please don't be rusty. The chariot continued to rise. The sun's chariot breathed fire, consuming Sun Ogong's magic power. Whoosh, whoosh, flames blazed fiercely. The magic power was so abundant that the heat permeated the interior. The speed increased. At this rate, it could even be compared to Apollo's real sun's chariot. That guy's magic power will never run out anyway. Yuan lay down on the seat. The heat from the chariot was quite hot, but it wasn't that deadly to the three of them. Let's just take it easy for now. Yuan supported his head with his hand and lay down on the seat. The sun's chariot, which had reached the 95th floor, turned off the light it had been emitting. Yuan, who had been lying down and taking a nap, opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. We're here already. 2 days. That was how long it took to go from the first floor to the 95th floor. During that time, Yuan had gotten the most sleep he had in almost 10 years. Yuan got up from his seat with regret. He might not be able to rest for a long time after this. Are you okay without resting? Yuan asked, looking at Sun Ogong's back as he stood precariously on the railing of the chariot. Judging from the speed at which he had come, he must have been constantly pouring out his magic power without resting for 2 days. Even if he wasn't tired, he must have felt a little fatigued. No problem. Swish. Sun Ogong gripped the Ruyi Jingu Bang tightly. He was already at his best. Yuan sighed as he watched Sun Ogong jump down under the chariot without even asking. That hasty personality doesn't change, even with age. Whoosh. Yuan's eyes met Sun Ogong's wand of gold. Yuan's eyes, which were looking down below the chariot, began to perceive the surrounding kilometers. A world covered in trees. Perhaps because it was right after the fight between Vishnu and the administrator, there was not a single person or monster in sight. The location is perfect, a world without the administrator. At the same time, there was not a single person living in this vast place. It wouldn't have been easy to find such conditions even after searching through all 100 floors. Yuan's gaze turned to Pandora for a moment. Don't worry. Don't worry. The moment the fight begins, Sun Ogong becomes a completely different person. Pandora, who had come to know Wu Wan fairly well by now, realized the meaning behind his gaze and shook her head. I'm not weak enough to be held back. Wu Wan nodded at Pandora's confident words. He knew it. He wasn't sure if it would be the same if they were fighting directly, but there was no way it would be dangerous for Pandora to watch the fight. Pandora was a high ranker in the double digits. Her skills were such that she could withstand fighting Sun Ogong directly for at least a few minutes. Nevertheless, it's really hard to take a step. Wu Wan, who had been hesitating for a moment, eventually jumped down below the carriage. At the same time, the carriage spewed fire again and rose higher into the air. Thud. Wu Wan, who had landed on a tree branch, looked around. The trees, which rose kilometers high, had branches that were thicker than average trees. Where is he? The surroundings were filled with trees. His vision was blocked, and he couldn't see Sun Ogong, who had jumped down first. The fight didn't start with the word, start. The moment they confirmed each other's fighting spirit, the fight had already begun on the carriage. That was the fight with Sun Ogong. Swish. Fire Eye of Truth is searching for the target. Fire Eye of Truth is countered by the same force. Target cannot be found. Fire Eye of Truth was originally a skill used by Sun Ogong. Although they were similar, the eyes that Wu Wan possessed were only made to track Sun Ogong, and as the original, Sun Ogong had a higher level of proficiency. Of course, it was difficult to find Sun Ogong's location with the same skill. However, Sensory Field is activated. Eye of Prophecy is opened. Wu Wan still had other abilities besides Fire Eye of Truth. Clang! The Ruyi Jingu Bang grazed Wu Wan's head. Wu Wan dodged the Ruyi Jingu Bang by tilting his head and looked at Sun Ogong, who was far away. Even though they were quite a distance apart, he could clearly sense Sun Ogong's presence. Furthermore, with this one move, Wu Wen realized Sun Ogong's intentions. Are you trying to distance yourself? People think that the great sage, who loves brawls and enjoys fighting, is a master of close combat. However, that was just nonsense from those who didn't know him well. That guy will do anything to win. He was a guy who fought more intelligently than anyone else. As soon as the fight began, Sun Ogong became a totally different person. He was someone who had invested all his brainpower into fighting. Perhaps he had a strategy for this fight. In that case. Creak, one of Wu Wen's eyes flashed gold. Foresight. A skill that allowed him to see a glimpse of the future and seize it with his own hands. In terms of the eye of fire and gold alone, Wu Wen's eyes were inferior to Sun Ogong's, but foresight was different. Thwack, Wu Wen narrowly dodged the Ruyi Jingu Bang that extended towards him again and started to close the distance. Dodging the Ruyi Jingu Bang that was flying from afar was no problem. No matter how far away it was or what angle it came from. Grow, Ruyi, Pying, Ruyi Jingu Bangs flew from over 100 directions. At that moment, time seemed to slow down for Wu Wen. This much is. Bam, Wu Wen's body shot forward in a straight line. I could have dodged it before. Thwack, 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 bang. Over 100 Ruyi Jingu Bangs knocked down the surrounding trees. Wu Wen's eyes lit up as he watched the giant trees that were dozens of meters thick fall down. The real one is. Wu Wen turned his head forward. And at that moment, thwack, a giant Ruyi Jingu Bang flew towards him. This is it. Clank, clang. Wu Wen's body was pushed back a little as he blocked the Ruyi Jingu Bang with one arm. However, either way, the fact that he had blocked it with his bare hands was meaningful. The giant's strength is imbued in your arm. Clatter, rattle. It was a skill that he hadn't used in a long time, but it felt natural. Wu Wen had imagined a situation like this for a long time. Even if he moved his body again, Wu Wen was still in his prime. This is how it will go. Wu Wen smiled as he blocked the Ruyi Jingu Bang. If he had decided to use the Ruyi Jingu Bang and his clones to fight from medium and long range. It seems that you made a mistake this time. He was the one who should be welcoming it. Sun Ogong didn't like the feeling he got from the end of the Ruyi Jingu Bang. A heavy feeling, as if he had hit a solid wall, traveled up his arm. Sun Ogong frowned at the unexpected sensation. Did he block it? Whying, thud, whoosh, thud. The Ruyi Jingu Bang that had been reduced in size once more fit snugly into Sun Ogong's hand. As expected, the feel he got through the Ruyi Jingu Bang was not satisfactory. Even looking at the place far away where Wu Wen was standing, he did not seem to be shocked at all. Various scenarios came to Sun Ogong's mind about what kind of technique Wu Wen had used to block the Ruyi Jingu Bang. However, it didn't matter what the case was. He knew beforehand. If he hadn't known, there was no way to block this. Even if he had blocked it with extreme reflexes, there was no way he wouldn't have taken some damage. It was impossible to predict this moment in advance with only the heavenly vision or sensory field. That meant foresight. As long as he was using that skill, Wu Wen would be able to be one step ahead of him in all of his moves. And then, Sun Ogong's eyes saw Wu Wen's lips moving from afar. Sun Ogong had good eyesight. No matter how far away he was, there was no way he couldn't read the shape of his lips. And Wu Wen's lips were saying this. Come at me. It was clear provocation, and that provocation heated Sun Ogong up even more. I'll take you up on that. His eyes narrowed even further. The gold in his eyes that were filled with flames grew deeper, and the hand holding the Ruyi Jingu Bang tightened. Get bigger. Sun Ogong stretched out the Ruyi Jingu Bang forward and prepared to take another step. And at that moment, Kriak, Wu Wen, who was standing far away, facing Sun Ogong, could be seen. Waha, Sun Ogong, who was about to stretch out the Ruyi Jingu Bang, flinched. Far away, it was because of a single black spear in Wu Wen's hand. Oh, crackle, crackle, crackle. Magic energy began to gather at the tip of the spear. His body was shivering from the flow of magic energy. It would definitely take some time to get it started, but it was already emitting power that could overwhelm the Ruyi Jingu Bang. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Even at this moment, the spear was gathering and emitting magic energy, gradually growing larger. And Wu Wen, who was holding it, was in a throwing stance. Through his appearance, Sun Ogong was reminded of one person. Odin. It was Odin's appearance before he threw Gingnir. Following him, the shape of Wu Wen's lips seemed to be saying this. This distance is not yours. Chapter 538. At the same time, he creates a path for himself to throw the spear. The world turned pitch black, at the same time as the illusion of being swallowed by the pitch-black darkness. Kwang, a flying spear pierced Sun Wukong's side and flew past. At that very moment, Sun Wukong's eyes turned golden. Swish, quack, quack, quack. He blocked the flying spears with both of his hands. Blood flowed from his palms, and his forearms trembled from the force he exerted on his fists. I blocked it, at that moment when he was finally able to relax. Puwa, the spears that he caught in his hands scattered into dozens of pieces and flew towards Sun Wukong all at once. Ha, Kwao, the spears exploded. Sun Wukong crossed his arms to protect his vital points amidst the storm of sharp magical power. Chiak, Chiji, wounds formed despite the magical power protecting his body. Sun Wukong narrowed his eyes and glared at Wu Wan, who was creating distance from him. Is that how it's going to be? Sun Wukong was quite confident in a long-distance battle. After all, he had the clone skill and the Ruyi Bang, an item that was not restricted by distance. Let's give it a try. Sun Wukong was not the type to run away after getting hit once. Once he started, he would go all the way. If he couldn't control this distance, he would not be able to win. Thud, the Ruyi Bang flew past Wu Wan. There was more than one Ruyi Bang. Their numbers continued to increase, and soon there were hundreds of them. It's getting harder to avoid them even though I know they're coming. Sun Wukong, who possessed nearly infinite magical power, could use over 1,000 clones. The power of the Ruyi Bangs wielded by the clones was not comparable to that of the original, but each one of them possessed power that was comparable to the skills of a high-ranking player. Personally, Wu Wan found Sun Wukong much more difficult to deal with when he was like this. If he were to get close, he wouldn't have to worry about the clones, but if he created distance like this, the advantages of the Ruyi Bangs and the clone technique would be maximized. If the numbers increase, keying, light radiated from Wu Wan's eyes. I'll just have to increase my tempo. The precognition function is increasing. Proficiency in precognition is increasing. He moved his feet as he pulled his shoulders back and took a javelin-throwing stance. Finding Sun Wukong's original body. Dodging the Ruyi Bangs. Dodging the Ruyi Jingu Bangs. Unlike Heracles with his toughness and defense, he gets up eventually no matter how many times he gets hit thanks to his immortal nature. He uses the somersault cloud to dodge the attacks, but he's getting increasingly overwhelmed by Yuan's diverse attacks. Eventually, Yuan's black forest goats appear and surround Sun Wukong, putting him in a life or death crisis. At the same time, he creates a path to throw the spear. And the next moment, Tartarus power is imbued into Nier. Nier is activated. Screech. The power of the same attribute, Tartarus mana, seeps into the tip of Nier's spear. Higher, even higher. Yuan's eyes scan the ground as he jumps high up. Out of the hundreds of Sun Wukongs, Yuan's eyes pick out the single main body. And have you given up on running away altogether? He doesn't try to dodge the spear, and stands there facing Yuan with his two legs planted firmly. It was a wise choice. No matter how much of a Sun Wukong he is, there was no way he could dodge Yuan's spear that had maximized the power of precognition. No matter what path he took to dodge, Yuan's spear would fly straight for Sun Wukong. It's better to prepare to block the spear from the start like Sun Wukong did just now. Kriak. The power of a giant is imbued into the right arm. The arm holding the spear swells up. The power of gigantification is maximized, and the power to throw the spear is strengthened. Thwack. The spear with strengthened power shoots out straight. Sun Wukong's eyes, looking at the spear, flash gold. At the same time, judging from his sharply protruding fangs, it seemed he was using his demonic power as well. Qua. A black spear pierces through the forest. The aftershock of its mana, swallowing the surrounding light and sound, reaches all the way to where Yuan is standing. Crack. The large trees of the forest created by Vishnu lose their vitality and crack apart. The power of darkness attribute mana is corrosion. Watching the trees lose their moisture and vitality and slowly turn to dust wasn't exactly a pleasant sight. Qua. The tsunami of mana created by the spear slowly starts to die down. Yuan looks around at the desolate sight in front of him. My opponent is Sun Wukong. Yuan has now recognized the opponent he's fighting. It can't end with this. If his opponent was someone else, he wouldn't have thrown something like this during a simple spar. This one blow most likely had the power to kill his opponent. But Sun Wukong was different. He was immortal and had a tenacity unlike anyone else. Unlike Heracles, who had a strong physique and defense, this guy could get hit and hit again, but eventually get up due to his immortal nature. Phew, just like right now, Sun Ogong staggered to his feet. Judging from the blood all over his body, he didn't seem to be okay, but his expression was the complete opposite of his condition. This won't do, he muttered as if he was feeling sorry and smiled. His gaze was more combative than before. He had finally started bleeding, so now was the beginning. I see, just because he had inflicted damage unilaterally didn't mean he had gained the upper hand. His opponent was Sun Ogong. His greatest strength lay not in any ability, but in his tenacity to rush in as if he was going to die, despite the fact that he wouldn't die. Sometimes you seem like you have the characteristics of a berserker. Berserker, why, you get stronger when you bleed. Sun Ogong was real after he saw blood. Hot steam, like steam, erupted from Sun Ogong's mouth, who had increased his concentration. The next moment, bam, along with a sound like something was exploding, Sun Ogong's new form appeared before Wu Won's eyes. Crash, snap, the tree behind Wu Won broke and fell backwards. Wu Won's eyes, which had dodged the fist, caught the trajectory of the Ruyi Jingu Bang. Whoosh, whoosh, screech, the area and length of the Ruyi Jingu Bang, which was swung faster than the wind, changed freely. One change after another, and Sun Ogong's technique, which freely controlled the heavy Ruyi Jingu Bang with one hand, combined with the Wan Jiamzheng, quickly blurred his vision. Bam, Sun Ogong's fist hit Wu Won in the stomach. Just for a moment, at that very moment, the shock was transmitted. Divine march of 100 steps. Bang, Wu Won's body was pushed back and flew away. Fortunately, the shock wasn't that great. Blessing of the sea is imbued in your body. Blessing of the sea protects your body from the divine march of 100 steps. Clatter, he stuck his sword into the trunk of a tree and steadied himself. The blessing of the sea protected his body, but some of the shock was transmitted. It was quite a powerful technique. It wasn't Sun Ogong's technique, but it wasn't a technique he had seen for the first time either. Divine march of 100 steps. Is it a technique you learned in China? I can't believe he's using the Buddha's techniques. Sun Ogong's tricks were more numerous than he had thought. Even his quarterstaff techniques, which had reached their peak, were lacking in martial arts, but now he had the skills of the Buddha. It wasn't for nothing that the guy had closed the distance. This time it's close combat, huh? Swish, Yu Won put the sinior, which had returned to his hand, back in his inventory and drew his sword. From now on, it was the second battle, so to speak. The power of the giant dwells in your body. Qian Marayong demonic spirit controls the giant's flames. Flare, a giant figure appeared behind Yu Won. Qian Marayong, wielding a flaming sword, and Yu Won, armed with the flames and power of the giant, provoked Sun Ogong. Come at me, monkey. Sun Ogong seemed excited, but he was rational. No, the more excited he got, the more rational Sun Ogong became. There was nothing as foolish and stupid as getting excited when fighting. Maybe that was why, the more Sun Ogong thought rationally, the more he felt like he was sinking into a swamp. What the hell is this? Boom, flare, the flaming giant's sword cut down a tree. Dodging the flaming sword that reminded him of Surtur, Sun Ogong felt a chill down his spine. Even if he widened the distance a little, it was no use. Crackle, crackle, the golden lightning bolts filled the sky. As they fell all at once, Sun Ogong had no choice but to flee on his somersault cloud. Rumble, boom, the lightning bolts poured down without rest. The moment he approached to avoid it, the flaming giant swung its sword again. Crash, flare, flare, the burning tree burned fiercely. He was confident in his resistance to flames, but this was different. That bastard, he said he ate Surtur's heart. The power of the flames was extraordinary. No matter how powerful the Wan Jiamzheng was, he wouldn't be able to avoid burns if he were caught in those flames. Besides, if I try to widen the distance. Bang! He quickly moved the somersault cloud to dodge the lightning. It was a close call. If he had let his guard down for a moment, he would have been struck by lightning. One or two might not have been a problem, but if he were to be hit by lightning of this power in succession, it would be fatal. Then, what do you want me to do? If you get close, Yu Won's sword flies with a giant wrapped in Surtur's flames. When you open the distance to the middle, he scatters lightning bolts, and if you open the distance at all, he fires a spear resembling Dingner. Yu Won's means were superior at all distances. It's been a long time since I've had a fight that didn't answer like this. It was a strange feeling. It was like fighting not one person but many. Even the many were Surtur, Zeus, and Odin. No matter how much Son Goku was, he couldn't face them at the same time. So while Son Goku was racking his brain to find the answer. Flash, a flash of light flashed before his eyes. Whoa, Kwang! A spear made of condensed magic energy grazed Son Goku's head and passed by. Thanks to the fact that he quickly lowered his head, he managed to avoid any damage, but it was a close call that made his liver cool. Veins popped out on Son Goku's forehead, who was relieved. He didn't like to just dodge like this. Whether I win or lose, I can't stand this kind of thing. Son Goku's somersault cloud Jinduan, who turned his body, began to fly towards Yuan. It was a hasty choice, but it was Son Goku's best. As a result, the more time he dragged on and ran away, the more he would be cornered. Kya, Son Goku, riding on the somersault cloud Jinduan and aiming his wishful stick Yuibong. He added strength to his hand holding the wishful stick Yuibong in addition to the speed of the somersault cloud Jinduan. The best weapon given to him was just a advance suddenly Dolgen. It was the moment when he was trying to dig into Yuan's arms and throw his last move. Ki-ee, the somersault cloud Jinduan, which was moving fast, suddenly slowed down and stopped. The heavenly great sage, who stopped in the middle of a fight. Hey, I couldn't help it, this is foul play. Me. The sight that unfolded before his eyes now was a situation where even Son Goku could not help but lose strength. Me, a loud and annoying cry echoing in my ears. The power of them, which I thought I could forget and live for a while, was boring and scary. Black Forest Goat with 1,000 kids. Shub Niggurath. Her children have now reappeared in this forest. Chapter 539. Azathoth's name has definitely disappeared. The power his name possessed has vanished, and there were no traces of him left behind. However, that didn't mean that all names had disappeared. Swish. Yuan petted the mountain goat's head. It was the first time he had written his name since the last war. It felt quite awkward since it had been a while. I wish I didn't have to write it. Bah. Was it because it had been a while since he called them? The mountain goats seemed to be in quite a good mood. The air was refreshing, and this forest that Vishnu had created was probably similar to where they used to live. Let's stop here, Yuan said as he stroked the goat's fur. You should go back inside. Bah. They bleated sadly and their bodies slowly began to fade away. Sun Wukong, who had been running toward them with his Rui Jingu Bang, lowered his arm and nodded. Yeah, let's do that. There was nothing less fun than continuing to fight an opponent who didn't seem to want to fight. Normally, this would be a tense situation where neither side could come out on top, but for some reason, it didn't feel like that this time. Sun Wukong watched Yuan loosen up his stiff body after moving for the first time in a while and chuckled to himself. Maybe it was obvious. It might have been the result that had been decided from the beginning, even before Yuan had come here with the clockwork. He had received the favor of Wan and the giant transformation skill from the tutorial. He had gathered all the core items of Olympus Trinity and had taken Surtur's flame, which had been the core of Ragnarok. They had been thinking about it for a long time. Sun Wukong, Heracles, Zeus, Odin, Surtur. If the strengths of the great high rankers who ruled the tower were combined into one, would there be an ultimate ranker who could overcome any adversity? No matter how absurd the chaos or how strong enemies like Shub Niggurath or Yog-Sothoth were. And now, I thought he hadn't done anything for 10 years. In the battle just now, Sun Wukong had seen the result of that great experiment with his own eyes. It was completed during that time. Varuna, who had just returned to Devata, was unable to say anything. He was known for being talkative, but this was the first time he had ever been speechless. It's suffocating. He really felt like he was suffocating. There was a long line in front of him. The rankers who had been helped by Vishnu in the past. And the residents of the tower who had enjoyed peace thanks to Deva. They paid their respects at Vishnu's grave, offering silent prayers and expressing their condolences. And Varuna was one of them. Chirp, chirp, it was a beautiful day. As befitting the place where Vishnu rested, the area around his grave was a beautiful field surrounded by greenery. The birds were singing on this unusually beautiful day. Varuna couldn't believe that Vishnu was really dead. Thud. After a while, Varuna stood in front of Vishnu's grave, holding flowers in his hand. He closed his eyes for a moment to mourn Vishnu's death, then turned away. There were still many people waiting to mourn him, and he couldn't keep taking up time for himself. Click. That's how Varuna left, and headed towards Yama. Yama was leaning against a tree. His face looked absent-minded. He knew that something was wrong, but Varuna didn't notice the look on Yama's face. You ran away well, Varuna. Are you calling my name now? Swoosh. Arrows of water magic were created around him. Varuna's sharp, pointed magic aimed for Yama's throat. The surrounding magic power surged, and the attention of everyone around them was drawn to it. If you know what honor is, kill yourself right now. That's all you can do for Deva and for Lord Vishnu. Lord Varuna, calm down. It wasn't just Varuna who expressed his anger towards Yama. Countless other rankers expressed their anger towards Yama, who had returned alone, but it was rare for them to be so blatant about it. Most of them couldn't bring themselves to show their teeth to Yama. Shut up, all of you. Wah! At the same time as Varuna's cry, a curtain of water spread out around him, pushing away the rankers around him. The Deva rankers who had tried to intervene in the fight with force were unable to overcome Varuna's barrier and were forced to stay far away from Yama and Varuna. Speak up if you have a mouth, Yama. How dare you come back alone? Varuna's expression was complicated. He was angry and at the same time begging him to persuade him. He thought that was the only way he could keep himself from shooting Yama with an arrow right now. Originally, Varuna could not threaten Yama no matter how hard he tried. The difference in their ranking and abilities was clear. However, right now, Yama was not fighting back or refuting anything. I'm sorry, he didn't make excuses. He knew that saying it was because of Vishnu's last order wouldn't appease Varuna's anger. Even he felt that way right now. If he could go back to that moment right now, would he make the same choice again? Would he be able to leave Vishnu behind and run away? Bam! Yama clenched his fist. He clenched it out of anger at himself. Why don't you just kill me too? Varuna misunderstood his anger and thrust his neck forward. Go ahead, let's see how far you can stop me. A bow and arrow made of water were created in Varuna's hands. The bowstring was pulled taut. Unlike Yama, who showed no intention of fighting back, Varuna began to release his magical power in earnest. And soon, the moment the drawn arrow was about to be shot at Yama. Are you crazy? Bam! Screech! Varuna's bow and arrow turned into water droplets due to the cold shock he felt on the back of his head. Varuna, whose body was soaked, turned his head and glared at the white-clothed ranker who had hit him on the head. Vayu, don't shout, my ears are ringing. Are you defending this punk now? You of all people. Vayu, with a ranking of 310, he was a ranker who, along with Yama, had served Vishnu the longest in Deva. Nicknamed the Wind God, he was a master of using wind attribute magic as an art, and he had earned his place with his fist-based martial arts that infused his fists with wind. So, are you saying we should fight each other here and all die together? But this punk, look at Asgard. Among the procession that had come to mourn Vishnu were also Asgard rankers. They have lost their king, but they are still standing. Don't you feel anything? What do you want me to do? Don't pointlessly take your anger out on Yama. Look clearly, who is your real target for revenge? Whoosh, a sharp wind blew. Vayu was also angry. He was also indebted to Vishnu. However, he didn't take his anger out on Yama like Varuna. He was angry with Yama, but now was not the time for them to fight among themselves. And at those words, Varuna suddenly came to his senses. He remembered who they were really fighting now. The administrators. The absolute beings of this tower who killed Vishnu. Varuna's body trembled at the thought of them. Any player who had climbed the tower would have a fear of the administrators. We don't know yet if there is only one enemy or many. Varuna nodded at Vayu's words. It could be the arbitrary actions of the administrator on the 95th floor. Or it could be the movement of the entire group. For now, we should assume the worst. Zeus also warned us. The administrator had visited Zeus and warned him. And as soon as that warning was over, Vishnu lost his life to the administrator. Judging from the series of events, it was likely that there was more than one administrator involved. Do we have to face up to 100 administrators at most? If so, the situation would be hopeless. 100 administrators with the power of a top high ranker and tens to hundreds of millions of errands under their command. The enemy's forces were strong. On the other hand, they had lost Vishnu and Odin in the war 10 years ago. If it came to an all-out war, it would be a difficult fight. Of the current rankers, there are less than 10 who can stand up to the administrators. There were certainly rankers who could stand up to the administrators, including Zeus and Heracles of Olympus, as well as the great sages and Asura. However, their numbers were not that great, and their unity was not that strong. Of course, there's one person we're forgetting. Varuna knew that everyone, including Vayu, had forgotten one person. Of course, the only ones who remembered him were Varuna, Son Goku, Heracles, and Pandora, about 4 people. But, there may be one more. Until then, Yama, who had been keeping his mouth shut, suddenly opened his mouth. I'm not sure, but, what are you talking about? There's one person that Lord Vishnu was looking for. Lord Vishnu? Who's that? Yama recalled the conversations he had with Vishnu in his head. The name that contributed the most in the fight against Shub-Niggurath. A rancor that everyone had forgotten, and even he couldn't remember who it was now. Kim Yu-won. Kim Yu-won. At the unfamiliar name, Bayu made a puzzled expression, while Baruna's eyes grew wide. He never thought he would hear that name from Yama's mouth. Yama noticed Baruna's expression. On the other hand, Bayu still looked confused. I don't know that name. Is it a rancor from a mid-tier or low-tier guild? I don't know either. You don't know. He's just someone that Lord Vishnu was looking for. During the time of Vishnu's passing, Yama tried his best to remember the name Kim Yu-won. However, no matter how much he dug through his memories, he couldn't recall anything about Kim Yu-won, not even a single clue. He felt frustrated because it seemed like he would remember if he could just see his face, but he couldn't. Do you guys know anything about him? Not at all. I see. Swish. Yama's gaze turned towards Baruna. The moment their eyes met, Baruna flinched and asked. What? Why? Baruna, do you? Me? Baruna looked away and hesitated. Vishnu was looking for Kim Yu-won. Thinking about why he started looking for him, the reason was obvious. It's because of me. When he first couldn't remember Yu-won, Baruna asked Vishnu about him. Who was Kim Yu-won? That was probably the first step. That's why. Pretend that you don't know anything in the future. Yes, don't go around talking about him for no reason. For the time being. Yu-won had warned him not to talk about him for no reason. He couldn't ignore the warning of the hero of the war from 10 years ago, so Baruna accepted it. However, but even then, Lord Vishnu was looking for him. Up until then, Baruna had never thought of a situation like this. What should I do? Chapter 540. After the fight, Yu-won and Sun O-gong got back on the carriage. The one who was injured was Sun O-gong. It seemed like it would take some time for the wounds from Nier's piercing and the injuries from the explosion of magic power to heal. Pandora placed a medicine bottle in front of Sun O-gong. It meant that he should apply it to his body. It's fine. It'll heal on its own if I leave it alone. Doesn't it hurt? It's fine. It's fun. It hurts for me. Do you not like fighting? Yeah, that's unusual. Is it? A simple conversation. Normally, he would hate fighting, but Pandora seemed to think she was the strange one for answering nonchalantly. Don't talk nonsense. Your taste is like a pervert or something. Sun O-gong made a dissatisfied expression at Yu-won's nagging. His complaint was always the same. You and Heracles are both strong, but you don't use it. I'll use it when I need to. I was so bored because of you. I hope you're bored for the rest of your life. That seems better for peace. Sun O-gong picked up the medicine Pandora had given him while watching Yu-won sigh. So what are we going to do now? It doesn't look like there's a manager here. There won't be a fight right away anyway. Then, Sun O-gong asked Yu-won what he was thinking. He could tell from the sparring just now that he was strong enough. If he was with Yu-won, it seemed like they would be able to win even if Shub-Niggurath showed up again right now. The problem was the plan from now on. Let's go back for now. Go back. Where? Yu-won had been forgotten until now. Even the Ranking Management Bureau had forgotten him and he had disappeared from the rankings, and normally, no one would look for Yu-won in this urgent situation. In the end, Yu-won had no choice but to move on his own. And the place Yu-won was going to go from now on was to the battlefield. It was the place where the longest war in the long history of the tower had taken place. Growl. A giant beast as big as a house with 4 horns bared its teeth. Its skin was hard and tough, impenetrable even to the weapons of the rankers, and it shot electricity from its horns. The monster was the leader of the monsters that appeared on the 50th floor, and it was a monster named Noilong, meaning, Thunder Wave. Drive it to the west. Don't get close. You'll get hit by electricity. Don't approach it. You'll get caught in the electric shock. You held on well. Amidst the chaotic battlefield, urgent voices rang out one after another. The brainwave was a monster from the demon clan that had existed for over 1,000 years and had slaughtered countless inhabitants. In order to capture the creature that even several high-ranking warriors had failed to capture, the warriors of the celestial realm had assembled their forces on a large scale. Kukung. A wolf-like howl mixed with electric shocks spread out. Quazazaza. The ground around them was swept away by blue electric shocks, leaving claw marks. The warriors who had been attacking the brainwave were blown away. Some of them seemed to have been electrocuted, their eyes rolling back in their heads as they fell to the ground. Kururung. The brainwave, which had stopped moving for a moment, turned its body and looked at the celestial soldiers who were pursuing it. Its eyes were curved, as if it were laughing. The fact that it had stopped instead of running away must have been because it was confident that it would not be caught. Damn it, that damn bastard, the speed and power with which it toyed with the warriors of the celestial realm. It was not for nothing that the creature had survived for over 1,000 years. It was at the top of the food chain because it had the ability to do so. Of course, even so, it was still annoying. Damn it, if this keeps up, we'll lose it again. The high-ranking warriors, the Golden Horn King and the Silver Horn King, gritted their teeth. They had been given the task of hunting the brainwave in order to receive the rank of general in the celestial realm. They had started pursuing the brainwave 5 years ago. However, the brainwave had enjoyed toying with the two of them with its fast speed. It was as if it was saying that they would never be able to catch it, no matter what they did. The net of heaven and earth has been broken. At that moment, news came like a bolt from the blue. What? This bastard, the net of heaven and earth. It was a net that connected heaven and earth, and the Golden Horn King and Silver Horn King brothers had borrowed the soldiers of the celestial realm to spread the net of heaven and earth in order to capture the brainwave this time. However, the brainwave had torn the net apart with its sharp claws and electric shocks. Are we going to lose it again this time? If this happens, our chance to get a place in the celestial realm will be gone. Just as the two of them were about to lose the brainwave. You've held on well. Bam! A silver line flew quickly over the heads of the two brothers, its wide mantle fluttering. They couldn't even see who it was. How fast? So fast that the agile Thunder Wolf's speed seemed laughable. There was only one thing the two of them could see. It was just a huge curved sword that was longer than an average tall man. No way. Swoosh. The curved sword flew toward the Thunder Wolf's neck. Quang, quang, chi, chi, chi. Feeling threatened, the Thunder Wolf's body began to scatter as blue lightning. At that sight, the green-haired man wielding the curved sword glared at the Thunder Wolf whose form was beginning to fade away. I wondered why no one could catch you until now. And the moment he reached out, swoosh, the Thunder Wolf's form, which had turned into lightning and disappeared, reappeared. Gurgle, the eyes of the Thunder Wolf, whose neck was caught, trembled. Yulongjingan, who held the curved sword in his hand, looked at the Thunder Wolf like that and left a last greeting. In your next life, be born as a good spirit. Slash. The curved sword cut the Thunder Wolf's body in half in one breath. Yulongjingan turned his body without hesitation after swinging his curved sword once. Slice. The Thunder Wolf's body, which had been cut by the curved sword, belatedly split in half and fell to both sides. It was such a clean blow that not even blood splattered. Jeomgakdaejang and Yunokdaejang opened their mouths wide as they watched Yulongjingan, who had caught the Thunder Wolf almost as soon as he appeared. Yulongjingan, is this the power of a top high ranker? Yulongjingan, he was a high ranker currently ranked 20th and the de facto leader of the heavenly realm. His position was the great general, and although he did not sit in the emperor's seat, there were rampant rumors that he had turned down the position. One of the rulers of this tower, who once competed with the famous Cheonjandizong. The two rankers had no choice but to prostrate themselves at his appearance. I greet the great general of the heavenly realm. Yulongjingan looked down at the two who were greeting him excessively. Judging by their manners, they seemed to be heavenly realm generals, but they were unfamiliar faces. Then suddenly, Yulongjingan recalled the report that a ranker from outside the heavenly realm had been deployed to this place to hunt the Thunder Wolf. You're them, the rankers who go by the names Captain Goldhorn and Captain Silverhorn. Yes, we have long yearned to become generals of heaven, but our skills were lacking, so we have been working hard to improve them. Is that so? Good work. Thud, thud. Yulong lifted both of their shoulders to commend their efforts. Yulong turned around, leaving the two of them smiling broadly. Immediately, General Bookchian, who had approached Yulong's side, asked. What do you think? Their skills are passable. Then, let them in, but hold off on making them generals. Is there something you don't like about them? When I look into their eyes, I see madness. Rather than the bearing of a general, I see eyes that seek something. Yulong looked at his own face reflected in the sword of the moon and continued speaking calmly. If they want to become generals of heaven, they must correct their minds first. If Captains Goldhorn and Silverhorn had heard this, they would have been terrified. However, General Bookchian seemed to have anticipated this reaction from Yulong, as he bowed his head and replied. I understand. And, is it soon? Yes, it starts tomorrow. Yulong sighed and raised his head at General Bookchian's reply. Fortunately, the troublesome hunt for the Thunder Wolf had been successful. However, that was only part of the preparation for the successful execution of the next event. For heaven to regain its former status, the event starting tomorrow had to be a success. Please. Yulong thought of Captains Goldhorn and Silverhorn, whom he had just met, and his sigh deepened. We need useful people to participate. The heavenly competition. It was a word that referred to the great battle that took place long ago when Sun Ogong and the Bull Demon King invaded heaven. However, that was literally a long time ago. This competition, modeled after the Muram competition, was first held on the 50th floor, located in the center of the tower. Today was the day. Is it really okay to use this? What is? I mean, the heavenly competition. I'm sure it was taboo just a few years ago. How would I know? It's been over 10 years since the Jade Emperor passed away, and our relationships with the Great Saint of Pyeongchang and the Great Saint of Jekian aren't bad either. A conversation between generals who were looking down at the crowd gathered in heaven from the sky. The heavenly competition was a word that had long been taboo in heaven. It was not good for the fact that the heavenly realm, one of the major guilds, had a hard time against only two people to be talked about continuously. However, the situation has completely changed now. Besides, is the heavenly great saint the same as the old days? Now, the history of fighting the heavenly great saint is not shameful for us. The heavenly great saint, when the heavenly war first started, his ranking was out of the top 20. However, as the heavenly war continued and eventually fought on par with the heavenly realm, the rankings of the heavenly great saint and the great general of the heavens rose several levels higher than before. And now that guy's ranking is third. Heavenly great saint Sun Ogong. He originally had the fourth ranking after Zeus, Vishnu, and Hercules. However, due to Vishnu's death, his ranking rose one step to third place. Oh, how creepy. To the administrator, this is a festival in this time when Vishnu is dead. This is a story from a distant world. Still, probably, guilds close to Diva will not participate in this war. There must be some useful participants. The Heavenly War was not much different from the Muram War, except for the name. A place to find skilled players and recruit them from each guild. And a place to raise your worth before joining a guild. The Heavenly Realm wanted to attract new rankers with this war. Excuse me, as the two Heavenly Realm generals were talking about this and that. I'm trying to participate in the Heavenly War, but where should I go? A man approached the two and asked for directions. It was a strange outfit. It certainly didn't seem like a ranker or player living on the 50th floor ruled by the Heavenly Realm. It seemed that he had heard the news of the Heavenly War. Go down there and look for the red flag. Thank you. I hope you do well. With that greeting, the man left his seat without hesitation. It was nothing special, it was something that had already happened dozens of times today. However, the two looked at the place where the man had passed for a while with an indescribable creepiness. That person, and then, don't you think I've seen it somewhere? The general, who had been lost in thought, asked about the identity of the creepiness.